All right, good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, November 21st, and we're going to start off actually with our public hearing. The public hearing is going to be under SAU budget RSA 194C 7:10. And this will be the public hearing of the upcoming SAU fiscal year 2024 budget. Mr. Superintendent. There you go.
Want to work on it? Sure, I'm just going to check to see. Kristen's not there yet. Sure.
Can you just go ahead and entertain a motion to open the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
Thank you. Motion's been made by Ms. Grant, second.
I'll second.
Second by, you heard Terry? Oh, Victoria, thank you. Ms. Parisi, let's go ahead and entertain any discussion. Seeing none, roll call vote if Kristen's online yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, so we could just do a regular vote. All in favor, please raise your hands. Opposed? Abstentions? Seeing none, the motion carries. The public hearing is now open.
Terrific. I'm going to just introduce just a few slides and turn it over to Amy for some numbers. Just a reminder where we are. So feedback from last year's SAU budget process. There were some questions about the codification of the process and step by step, and where is it documented and what is the written process. So there was a committee formed that met last summer, and with a couple of agenda items. One is to let's make sure we have a codified, written down, supported process. So certainly we can inform the public, but also be held accountable to. So that was one piece. And then we also wanted to make sure that we had a time to recruit. We wanted to make sure we had a full slate of budget committee representation. And then there was a significant discussion by the committee about whether or not the SAU budget would be beneficial to put that on the warrant and have that process go. So I think we've met those standards. We've had a codified process. We've had a full, and Martin will speak to a robust advisory committee, budget committee weigh in, and I've had a privilege to attend those meetings. And perhaps tonight it will come up as well to take a look at the SAU budget to put on the warrant, but that was fully vetted, and a recommendation came back to this board in the fall. And just remember what we're talking about here. In the past, I did speak to how incredibly regulated public school is, and certainly the compliance effort in the SAU is extraordinary. So what does the SAU office do? It really is about educational leadership. It's about curriculum instruction and assessment, professional development. I think we process hundreds of professional development requests to support the credentials of hundreds of employees. Today, for example, I was telling Christine and I met to talk about a worker who is leaving for months due to work and heading to Mexico. And how do we work? We work with the building there, provided expertise there. We have human services work. We had a meeting with a building employee today to talk about different options. Of course, so hiring this year, we've done more hiring, and in the last 2 years, more hiring than probably the few years before that combined. All the student services work, the technology work, and of course, what we're doing now is developing and leading on the budget. And I think the number of POs that are purchase orders that are processed is in the hundreds, if not even higher, thousands. So thank you for that. We do facility leadership, we coordinate transportation, we facilitate all the food service, all the budgets and finance accounting. That is your SAU office, right? That is the administrative services and supported here. And I don't think it's in this slide, but it's also, we talked about the expectation to move people towards best practice. So the leadership in the SAU office is dedicated to moving everyone towards best practice. And that really is the engaged work, and that really is the meat of the work that we do every day. Amy put together a 10-year staffing history, and some of the feedback, and we get this, sometimes it can be difficult to track positions because some came back from a district. Like we had a position that came back from a district into the SAU office because of the services and things. And we will try to solidify and stabilize over time so the tracking can be easier. And one of the things that I think at the very first SAU Advisory Finance Budget Committee meeting, I talked about one of the decisions that the SAU board is going to have to make and address is a year from now is the efficacy of that second assistant superintendent. We know that. I think you'll hear that tonight. I've been pretty honest, being in that position last year for a little bit. This year, interesting trying to do it. And I can certainly speak to the implications of having one assistant superintendent and a interim superintendent. But as far as the staffing goes, that's the most significant change in staffing over the last few years, adding that second leadership position at the SAU level of the assistant sup, and we'll hear some recommendations there. So the background, a codified process, a full budget committee participation, recruitment, significant compliance efforts in a huge regulatory environment, a staffing proposal, a hard look at staffing over the 10 years, which we understand is some evaluation of the most significant staffing change in the last 3 years, which is the assistant superintendent. Second one, I should say.
Thank you, Steve. So since draft 2, are you going back?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just one quick thing.
Since draft 2, the numbers haven't changed. However, this is a public hearing, so I think it's important to go over the numbers in draft 2 and some of the slides that I know you have already seen, but we want to make sure this is available for the public as well. So in summary, the budget is a 4% increase over the FY23 adopted budget. It's useful to divide the budget into 2 main categories: personnel, that includes salaries, benefits, and non-personnel, which is also further divided into facilities, technology, and operations. And operation generally refers to services such as legal, audit, supplies, phone, etc. So the personnel main categories in there for the increase are a retiree benefit, a retiree payout at FY24, the proposed 3% salary and benefit pool. There were also additional salary and benefit increases in FY23. So those are also need to be accounted for. The change from the contracted cleaning services to a 0.38 part-time employee. That increase is about $3,000. In doing that, making that change, that person is providing additional services to the SAU and certainly a major improvement in terms of quality. For non-personnel, there's a reduction in facilities costs, mostly due to that change in the cleaning service, minor increase in technology costs, and minor reduction in operations costs. So for budget assumptions, the guaranteed maximum rate for health insurance is 4.1% increase and 1.5% for dental. The New Hampshire retirement employer contribution rate was presented in draft 2 and as a 1.38% decrease for teachers and a 0.53 decrease for non-teachers. And staff are, that's okay, are designated as teachers or non-teachers, even though we aren't, well, some of you are teachers, but I'm not. You can go on. So economic conditions, as the majority of the SAU budget is salary and benefits, and there is a proposed wage increase of 3%. A review of the current economic conditions that are relevant to employment and cost of living indices is provided for information purposes. So CPI is a measure of inflation in consumer prices, and the ECI, employment compensation index, is an indication of whether employment cost changes are rising or falling. So it measures inflation of wages and employer paid benefits. So as I said, the SAU wage increase pool of 3% is below both of these indices. It's a 5.6% for ECI and 7% for CPI. And those you were presented with the June numbers last time, I believe, June and July, and I updated these for September. All right, so the proposed change in amount and percent in the budget from FY23 to 24. As I said, we break that down into 5 major budget categories. with 3.4% of the increase attributed to salaries, 1% to benefits, negative 0.5 for facilities, 2% for technology, and negative 0.1 for operations, for a total 4% increase, or the 117,976. So looking at the total dollar amount in the proposed budget by those major budget categories and the percentages as a total of the entire FY24 budget, the majority of the costs at the SAU are for salary and benefits. 63% for salary, 28% for benefits. So that's close to 90% of the budget, with facilities at 2%, tech at 4%, and operations at 3%, making up the remainder of the budget. So as you know, the SAU budget is incorporated into the 3 school district budgets according to an apportionment formula. So the total amount of the SAU budget to be apportioned to the 3 school districts is the $2,952,170. And this is the balance of the total budget and expenditures less any available revenue sources that can be used to offset those expenditures. Revenue for the SAU budget comes from 2 places: the unassigned fund balance and the E-rate revenue. The E-rate revenue is generated from discounts received on telecommunications, internet access, and internal connections. And in turn, we're able to offset some of our technology costs within the budget. The unassigned fund balance revenue is calculated using the unassigned fund balance from 2 years ago, because that's the last audited financials that we have. Our FY22 budget is closed, but it is currently being audited. We should receive those that audit information later this winter. So we reduce that by what was retained to offset this year's SAU apportionment, and use the balance of that to offset the FY24 budget. Then we take the average daily membership and the equalized valuation for property, and we determine the percentages of the total budget to be apportioned to the school districts. And for this budget, those percentages are 57.92% for Amherst, 9.85% for Mount Vernon, and 32.23% for Sauhegan. Yep. So looking at a comparison of the apportionment amount and percent from FY23 to FY24, Amherst will increase a bit by 0.18%. Mount Vernon will increase a bit by 0.62%, and Sauhegan will decrease by 0.8%, but they still will have an increase in dollar amount. The total dollar increase to be apportioned is the $229,304. So it's important to note that the increase in the amount to be apportioned to the school districts is due to changes in both the expenditures and revenues from FY23 to 24. So as we discussed, the expenditure increase from budget to budget is the 117,976, but there is less unassigned fund balance revenue available though for the FY24, with a decrease of $111,328. So the total amount of the increase is the $229,304, which is the increase in expenditures and the decrease in the revenue, if that makes sense. So next steps, really, we are at the end of this process. We are at the public hearing, and I know that the SAU Budget Committee met, and we'll have comments for the board to consider as well. And then we'll be looking for the board to make a vote on the budget this evening. I want to thank the SAU Budget Committee, chaired by Martin Goulet. They did a tremendous amount of work. There were lots of great questions. They had 2 scheduled meetings. They met an additional time, and they really did put a lot of effort and thought into the process. So I don't know, Martin, if you're going to introduce your folks, or I can name them. I have a slide. Okay, great, good. So yeah, also just noting that the public hearing posting was published in a variety of news outlets and on the SAU website. And I think that's it. If I'll take any questions. And I know we want to hear from the SAU Budget Committee. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
If you can just go ahead and introduce yourself and then, floor is yours.
My name is Martin Goulet. I chaired the Budget Committee. As you can see, we had representation. Oh, I'll wait till we get that up on screen.
I was gonna share it.
And I was gonna say, I assume that's going out on Zoom or whatever we're.
What sec? There it is. There it is. Took me a moment.
So I'd like to thank my fellow Budget Committee members. We had representation from the various Ways and Means and Advisory Finance Committees. We had representation from just citizenry. So Rick Barnes, Amherst, John Bouquet from the Sauhegan Advisory Finance, Ann Dodd from Mount Vernon, myself representing Sauhegan, Elizabeth Kuzma representing Sauhegan, Dan Pulaski, Mount Vernon, and Dwayne Purvis representing the Amherst Ways and Means. Excuse me. I want to thank my team for the effort and time they put in. A lot of, as Amy said, a lot of good questions. I want to thank this board for putting this process together. This was really what we've been asking for, a number of people that I'm familiar with in terms of, additional focus on the SAU budget, similar to what the other budgets go through. So appreciate the receptiveness to that, to that process change. So if we can advance the slide, please. So we took a vote and there were a number of people who said that they were uncomfortable with the budget and would vote no, but for some concerns that we felt could be addressed through making recommendations to this board. And my sense, and I'd welcome any corrections from the Budget Committee that's with me tonight, was that it wasn't so much that we were concerned about fiscal 23 to 24 per se. It was concerns about how we got to the budget values over time that were sort of the placeholder. And so these, the starting point for, for the modifications for next year. So these recommendations really are making sure that we can execute on some best practices that we, are already observing in some of the other budget areas going forward. So first of all, we recommend that you take up that issue of putting the SAU budget to the voters. And in fact, we recommend that you put on the ballot this year that recommendation so voters have an opportunity to weigh in on that. We would like to see an increase, you have an opportunity to increase the trust and transparency, trust by the community and transparency by the SAU and by this board by offering a concession on the SAU budget in the event that the schools revert to default. I know there was a significant disconnect in how people felt about, Amherst and Sauhegan operating under a default budget. And forgive me, I'm not even aware whether Mount Vernon's operating under a default. I didn't think so. And the SAU didn't have to make any modifications to its budget. So we recognize that we're not this year putting it on the ballot, but we would say that it would be a wise thing to do if in the unfortunate event that we end up in a default again, you take a hard look at the SAU budget and make some form of concession to that reality. And, we said for the, making changes to the raise pool, because frankly, that's really the only lever that you have in this budget. We would like to see enhanced oversight by this board in the process of the distribution of merit pool and the renewal of contracts. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that, every one of those contracts and every one of those increases is brought before this board, but you should be comfortable with the process by which that's being done. And the process, we felt it was important to call out, should include comparisons with market pay on a sort of roll by roll basis. So when I'm looking at roll X, I can say, so what is the market Where's the market for that role in the region that we operate in? Current and credible performance evaluations. So making sure that there's a history of evaluations, which are useful not only for the purposes of correcting underperformance, but also for documenting rationale for how we distribute the the scarce funds that come in that raise pool. I think a lot of credit goes to Steve for the processes that he's put in place to do that. I think the impetus for us to make this recommendation was really making sure that it's not dependent on a person, it's a system, it's a process, and that it gets followed regardless of who the individual that's occupying that chair happens to be. There was also significant interest in conducting a payroll study to take a snapshot. It's essentially like the going full circle on that comparison with market pay. It's like taking a look at all of the roles in the SAU and just getting a snapshot of that their current state with respect to market. So we know where we stand. So we know where we stand, and we don't end up with surprises like we had in the adjustments that were made in 2023. We agreeing with what Steve said earlier, we do recommend that you reconsider whether or not the SAU needs 2 assistant superintendents. I was going back in this in my mind, and we've gone from 0 to 1 to 2 in the time that I've been in Amherst, and 2, I don't know, it seems like it's probably more than we need. And then we want to make sure, and this is the last one really is, as you find yourself with unencumbered budget available, like we did, a year ago, just make sure that we're making thoughtful decisions and that it's done with oversight of this board. And collectively, these recommendations were, and the fact that we were committed to making these recommendations to you was what enabled us to, and you can advance, Steve, arrive at a 6-1 vote to approve this budget. Any questions from the board?
Couple of questions for Steve Chamberlain first. In terms of unencumbered funds that arise in the budget cycle, I believe this goes back to the money that was left over from somebody's salary, yours, Adam's, the combination of the two, plus and minus and all that. I believe everything that we've talked about, that money being used for, has been brought to this board at one point or another, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we all know that is happening, or at least it happened with those funds, because I know that was a big sticking point, and frankly, it was a lot of money. So as long as that continues, I think that's positive. My question, Martin, is in terms of the SAU budget, when there's a freeze, when there's a default budget for the school districts, we're supposed to freeze the salary pool for SAU employees. What does that do for us?
Well, we aren't necessarily telling you how to accomplish this. That was just that was in it for example.
But you said it was pretty much the only lever that we had to utilize. So it sounds like that's the recommendation, because my concern here is that when teachers have the contract passed, everybody is very upset about this, and teachers are bearing the brunt of inflation and all this. But if their contracts are passed in the next 4 years, we're in default budgets, they're still getting their raises. I think this is going to end up hurting us more than we like to think it might, because what maybe fairness, whatever you want to talk about with this. I think that this is a big potential problem in terms of keeping staff at the SAU.
You're talking about the second recommendation.
Correct. The second recommendation. Yes. I'm not talking about oversight of merit pool and contracts. That's a different thing. We can talk to the superintendent or the interim about, but not being able to give people raises because they're free market employees, whereas the union employees are going to get their raises. That doesn't seem appropriate to me for what is a free market economy in a lot of ways.
I think that's a reasonable position. It also didn't seem fair that the schools had to operate under a default budget and the SAU operated under the budget that they proposed. So it's there's trade-offs involved. I recognize that, and we just and we put you in the hard job of figuring out the
Sure.
how, but the point we're trying to make here is it left a bad feeling that happened, and we should try to avoid that to the extent that we're able to, if we find ourselves in that unfortunate position again. Although I will say that, we're in a better position if we decide to go forward with recommendation 1, because then we will either be in the default with the SAU budget or we won't. And we'll know where that budget stands going forward. But obviously that's not going to happen this year.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
for the
I'm
budget
sorry,
committee?
did I misrepresent any of our discussion? If anyone's recollect? Thank you.
Ms. Beam.
Love it when it cooperates. First off, thank you for all of your work. I know that having served on Ways and Means myself, it is a big commitment. And I hear that they were very lively discussions, as I would expect from the names on that list. And so thank you for all the thought and time that went into your work. And I guess I'm not against number 1 with the thought that I would need to know more about what the repercussions would be, because I don't know how it would work. If Amherst said yes and Mount Vernon said no, do they only pay the default portion and we pay the full amount? Or I just need to know more about the logistics of that. And so I'm not against investigating it for a future year, but I think that I would need to understand more. And
That's why you guys get paid the big bucks.
but I appreciate having the thought. And I think that I am very much along the lines with Mr. Gauthier on we do everything in our power to have fair contracts. And when we put them on the ballot, we can't control whether, we will be even more active in trying to make sure that the public understands what those are and supports those and supports our budgets. But once that's voted, that is a little bit of our control, whereas we do have a little more control here, and this is more free market. And I feel like there's both a national shortage of teachers and of administration. And when we have proven high performers, I would never want to lose them, because it would really be a detriment to our SAU overall if we had anything in our power to keep them, right?
If we had proven high performers, that would be reflected in the other recommendation that we made, was that we.
Which is why I'm really glad that recommendation is also there, because I think that the two of those go hand in hand, and that's why it would be nice to be able to have that proof. And I think that finally, on the 2 assistant superintendents, I certainly remember being here when many conversations occurred about this. If anyone has any thoughts about, I wonder why we made that choice. There are lots of minutes to go back to. There are meetings to go back to. And I think that because of the unusual nature of last year, we haven't even had 1 full year with both of those positions to see what they would bring us. And I don't think it's fair to look right now and say, are they appropriate or they're not, when we haven't had even 1 full year with both of them to see what they can bring us. And I think that it was always the thought that after at least a year, possibly 2, we would reevaluate and say, is this working for us? Is it not? Are we getting bang for our buck? And so, while I appreciate being on the list and I agree we should evaluate, I don't think there is a way for us to evaluate until we give due diligence and let them both be there serving the roles they were meant to serve for at least a year before we evaluate.
That will be your decision to make. I would say that, notwithstanding, for most of that time, we've been paying for them. So we can't evaluate them, but we've been paying for them, except for the 6-month period that is the exception. Which is why we make that recommendation. And we're not taking a position, but it is, if you look at that staffing chart, we're on the way back up. And
I understand the recommendation. I understand the question. I'm simply giving you my own thoughts.
no, that's these are recommendations. We hope you take them seriously, and we'd love to see them implemented.
Well, and I think that when we have some time behind it, there absolutely, again, was always a plan to reevaluate. And so I just want to, in case for anyone who's listening, that was always the plan. And so I appreciate you bringing it up. And I believe that I see no reason why we wouldn't still be doing that.
Great, thank you. Any other, Mr. Glover?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks committee for doing your work. I had a similar concern just to echo Tom's about putting the SAU budget on the ballot because pretty much all of the staff are protected either through their PVC agreement, Sauhegan, or the collective bargaining agreements otherwise, assuming they have a valid agreement that has been approved. And I worry a little bit about those people being isolated without like kind of what Terry was saying about they might be losing key people. But I also am not afraid of the voters and want to respect their will too. So I'm not sure what that solution is, but I'll take that seriously and think about that. I really like your what are we going to do about unencumbered funds? And Tom, you're right. We did discuss that for this case.
That recommendation in particular was really about just making sure that we document something we already knew had, you explained to us in great detail the process you went through. We just wanted to make sure that that wasn't upon the whim of having the right person in the seat. That was the way we did things. That's
Yeah.
really what we.
Well, and it wasn't publicized, that decision, to say, okay, here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it. So that would have gone a long way, maybe in the public being able to understand it more in real time as to what was going on with those funds. The idea of the two assistant superintendents, and that kind of dives into the payroll study. As I recall, we've centralized a lot of services at the SAU office, and I don't know if that's occurring in other comparable districts. So if you look, is it head count? Do you look at say Hollis Brookline has a very exactly the same SAU structure, 3 constituent school districts under one SAU. My understanding is, and I don't have a detailed list in front of me, they have less of a head count. My question for them is, it one-to-one comparison? Are other people in their constituent school districts doing work that we've actually centralized at our SAU office? I don't know the answer to that question. I'd like to explore that more before making any decisions on, concluding that we actually have too many people. I mean, I put out a concept at our last Sauhegan Advisory Finance Committee that maybe we should be putting our entire regular ed transportation services under our SAU budget, because by and large, it's required by law. And for practical reason, our bus routes aren't going to change, even if you tried to not pick up high school students or students living 2 miles or more away from school. So it wouldn't save you any money. That's not going to happen this year either, I don't think, but it's part of the conversation going forward. And that proposal would actually increase the SAU budget, but it might.
Yeah, I mean, in the current model, it would increase the amount that voters didn't have any say over. So I think
Right.
it would be very.
Well, and maybe that would be a reason.
The people that
Right.
came up with that
Exactly.
recommendation.
So I guess we're going to have to balance some of these things.
It is a complex SAU. I mean, there's no question about it.
Yeah, you raise great questions by your recommendations. I hope when you say, not you particularly, the committee says yes votes were contingent on their making the recommendation. So you've made the recommendations.
And the votes are cast.
And the votes are cast.
Right.
Okay.
We can't make you act. We can only recommend.
Understood. Well, thanks again for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vay.
Was some of the rationale behind putting the budget on the ballot. Maybe some concerns that some things were being moved to the SAU that were more appropriately placed in a district to avoid some of the chances of going into default to losing those
I'll
services.
rely on any recollections from my team as well, but I can recall 2 primary drivers of that. One, just the pressure of the vote exerts a sort of a fiscal discipline on the budgeting process, right? So when you have to take something to a vote, you're going to be looking at it a lot more carefully. And number 2, I can't remember what I had in my head as number 2.
What the idea was that, we would ask the voters this year that whether they would like to see it.
Right.
And be able to vote on it or not. And then in subsequent years, if the result was yes, then you implement that suggestion. Otherwise, You scrap it.
Oh, what, so I remember what number two was. Number two was just the whole sense of transparency and accountability, right? It feels different to voters, right? That we don't have a say over this. And then there's the, there's the risk that, yeah, you feel like, there's dollars put in there because it's going to get funded no matter what. But it was more about the transparency side of it than we think there's a slush fund being moved around. I don't remember that coming up.
Thank you. Ms. Grunt.
Yes, so one of the reasons we put the Ways and Means or Budget Committee together for the SAU was to create more openness in the process.
Yep.
So I was part of the group that first discussed what are the steps we could take to improve the communication. And one of it was, let's make sure we have a good, strong budget committee.
And we appreciate that.
And let's see if that can satisfy the voters. And that creates the transparency, because now we have a core, we have 7 people looking at the budget with some really good information. Adding it, I had some of the same concerns about pulling it onto a separate warrant article as some of the others. Not 100% opposed to it, but I guess I would like to take the year to look at it before doing that, to say, let's understand all the implications going forward, or is this a reaction to some past history? So let's not just do a knee-jerk reaction in 1 year. So my thought is, let's look at this over the year. Let's see what the implications would look like. My thoughts on the 2 assistant superintendents is, as we're looking for a new superintendent, I'd love for us to have a new person on board and work with that person first before we decide whether we need 1 or 2. I mean, I would have to say at Sohegan, we were able to make some pretty impressive improvements when we had our assistant superintendent that was assigned to the high school. We were able to do some significant evaluations at the school and things like that. So it would be interesting to work with a new superintendent and understand what their process, their vision is. They can get feedback from us of what we saw before we decide whether we need 1 or 2. Mayor's on the payroll state, that's actually not a bad idea. Probably not a bad thing to consider, and maybe it's something we can take up.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Coughlin.
Yeah, so thank you to the committee for all their work. I know it is a lot of effort, and I appreciate that. My main concerns are with the first 2 recommendations, and they're really around, as we search for a new superintendent, stability and recruitment and retention. And one of the things we've heard a lot as we have done this work is about stability at the top. And I think you risk stability at the top if you are constantly putting these free market employees at risk of not getting their raises. You risk not being able to recruit people if they have a choice to go to one place where they know that it's just the people they work with here or versus the voters. So I think the board should continue to talk about these things. I have no problem with that, but I do have some concerns when we look at these 2 questions about what could happen at the top if we are constantly putting those things at risk for the people who do a lot of important work in our schools. So.
And I'll just repeat what I said earlier. I think those are perfectly legitimate concerns. I just would advise you not to forget the flip side of that, which is that it leaves a very bad feeling in the mouth of the voters that everything else got, at least in the town of Amherst, everything else had to tighten the belt. And there's this sense that the SAU didn't. So, it's difficult. It's a trade-off.
Thank you. Ms. Parisi.
Thanks. Tagging on to what Stephanie was saying, just about our happiness that we've brought the SAU Budget Committee to fruition. Is there a place where more information can be found by residents, minutes from meetings or anything like that, where people can understand more of the conversations that led to these recommendations?
There are minutes of our last meeting. I don't know that they're published anywhere. The first 2 meetings, the first meeting we didn't have minutes because we didn't have officers. And the second meeting, there weren't officers present. So I don't believe there were minutes for that as well. I think the deliberation is best reflected in the question and answer tab in the budget workbook. That's really where, and kudos, by the way, to Amy, the pace of answering those questions was fast and furious and it never really backed up. So thank you very much. And so yeah, well, I can follow up and make sure that that last set of minutes is made available.
Yeah, and just something while we're working on the process moving forward, I think that's something that would add to the legitimacy moving forward for residents to be able to find those things.
It would have been, and I'm I'm somewhat remiss, but like, as I said, there were no officers in the first meeting. And it would have been we probably should have been reminded of that by, I don't know who the right person would have been, but someone who understands the sort of the public records requirements in that first meeting.
Thank you. Before we do second, was there another hand over here? I thought I saw one. No. I'm just going to make a couple quick comments. First of all, thank you to the committee for your hard work. I know giving up your time at night to review numbers is a challenge for some people, and obviously dedication is very clear with the work that you guys did. So thank you. I share actually Ms. Grun's comments about putting it on the ballot this year. I don't think it's ready from my perspective. I think as a board member, I'd want to properly understand the ins and outs of actually putting something like that on the warrant. Specifically because I know there's a couple of districts that do it, specifically in Hollis. I think is one that does the default. Understand where the benefits are and more importantly, where the challenges actually exist, as well as understand if there's any other districts there. So I think over the course of the next year, we as a board can either set up a committee and then work with inside our contingent boards to structure something to actually put on the warrant in 2024. For discussion by the taxpayers. A question is for you, Mr. Gray. Was there any recommendations for cuts this year?
No, we were comfortable that the budget was vetted appropriately, in light of the inflationary circumstances. As I said at the beginning of my comments, it was more a question of how we arrived at this point. There was some question about some of the rate of increases in some of the rolls over the last 4, 5, 6 years. And so that's why the market evaluation and the payroll study we thought were important things to do. So not so much that, that we thought there was budget to be cut necessarily, but that we might have grown too much too fast. And we don't want to make that same mistake again in the future.
Thank you. Ms. Beam and then Mr. Glover had his hand up. Sorry.
Some days they cooperate, some days they don't. Actually, I just wanted to say that I appreciate the recommendation for doing a literal comparison, not just overall, but roll by roll. And I do think that while we've done a good look at what overall things are at, I think that roll by roll would be really interesting to see and to see where we fall. I think that would be helpful. And I would maybe even love to have that sooner than later once we're able to stop swimming as fast as we can. I know you haven't slept in months.
That resources would work on.
Okay. I think that would actually be really helpful because I think that it would inform all of us. It would inform next year this committee that now that they're established, I'm assuming will be returning, if not every member of it. And I think that when you do have minutes, I know that our Ways and Means they have their own spot to publish. And so I think that would be offered as well, if you would like it. And I think just finally, I appreciate the fact that you're asking for us to consider understanding that even though something is in the budget, doesn't mean we're required to spend every penny. If we were to look and say, hey, take the temperature of the room and say, you know what, it's probably in our best interest to cut back here too, we're certainly not obligated to use that entire pool. And so I do appreciate the fact that we can always revisit that within this.
That's the spirit of the second bullet.
Yeah, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Mr. Glover.
Your light just came back on. Oh, it's flashing.
Thanks, Martin. Just my note on the payroll study, just be careful. Like, I'm curious what that looks like, but we might show that we're underpaying a lot of people too. So there's
Yeah, it's.
one, depends on, if you look at every line, every.
But there are some lines where we're pretty close to the top in the state. so
Yeah, well, and I
There'll
think,
be, there may be some of that, but there's some of the other,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
right, and that doesn't surprise me if that's true, because we, for many years, have paid handsomely for top talent, or at least that's what we strive for. We do it sometimes with teachers. We've done it with administrators. It's always been a board decision. You know, and sometimes you hit a winner and sometimes it doesn't work out and you have to try again. So
Yeah, and
no guarantees. By paying more, it doesn't guarantee you.
yeah, having
have
this
long
knowledge doesn't
success.
mean that you have to flatten or lower or anything. It means you have more information against which to make your decisions. So if you're paying for a top performer, then you'll see that in the pay and the evaluations.
And the evaluations. Yeah, good job. I also had a question for Amy, but I don't want to suck the air out of the room if people have more for the committee.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, Amy, could you put your slide up again? The, I think it was the second to last one.
The one of
Yeah, the one before that. I think it's. Yes. No. That with the unassigned fund balance, 74,997. Okay, I hadn't written it down, and then e-revenue 18, okay. I thought I'd seen a different number in these form in our packet, but it's not different. So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, quickly, I changed that, everybody.
You're
Very impressive.
good job.
All right, let's open up the floor for public comment with regards to our public hearing. Any members of the public like to address the board? Or comment on the budget? Seeing none, any last remaining questions for the business administrator or the interim superintendent? Before we close the public hearing.
So just to be clear, we are operating with less personnel this year than last year. Right, so we didn't fill the second, so and that was a decision that we made as a team. And so there is money here. We are actually spending, less money, less positions than we were last year. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't missed. There was another person up here last year.
Great, thank you. Seeing no further comment, let's entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion.
Motion made by Ms. Grunn, second. Second by Ms. Parisi. We will need to do a roll call vote because Ms. Clark is joining us virtually. So starting off with Mr. Glover.
Glover, yes.
Torres, yes.
Bailey, yes.
Peters, yes.
Grund, yes.
Gulay Zimmerman, yes.
Backoff, yes.
Lawrence, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Gothier, yes.
Conklin, yes.
White, yes.
Parisi, yes.
Beam, yes.
And Ms. Clark,
Do I need to do the whole, I'm alone and was unable for me to be there?
Can you, turn the
if that's
volume up
case,
for,
And then Clark,
Clark?
yes.
hold on, Ms. Clark, we just got to turn the volume up. There we go. You want to try that one more time?
Yeah, I'm assuming you need me to state that I'm alone and I was unable to be there tonight through reasons outside my control, and that's the case. And Clark, yes.
Yeah, it's coming out from over there. It's behind you, John, somewhere.
It wasn't Clark, yes, though.
Yeah, I heard it, but allowing it at home. I want to make sure everyone else can hear it, though. Kristen, can you just give us a 5 count?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Would it be problematic if you took one of the microphones and moved it there?
Yeah, this one.
And Steve, people who are listening via Zoom can hear Kristen just fine. Oh, it's just us. They don't matter all of that.
Can you hear me okay?
It's Cap. I don't know where.
Can you hear me?
Hold on just a second.
Sure.
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
A little better.
One more time.
Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3.
Oh, you nailed it. How about now?
Can you hear me okay?
You had it for a moment. This one. Yeah. Try now.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right. Thank you. Great. All right, let's go ahead and open up our regular meeting. The public hearing is now closed. And the first item on our agenda for this evening is any last remaining comments from the Budget Committee? Nope. Yeah, it is. So I'll try to move it away.
Down over there. Just the white ones.
Unfortunately, my mic is going through the laptop, which is the reason why it's projecting.
Well, no, it was projecting. They were all coming out of the speakers. They didn't turn it up.
Okay. We good? Can you hear me now? Good, thank you. All right, so let's open up our regular business public comment 1 of 2. Any members of the public like to address the board regarding any issues that are on their mind? And then we're going to open up the floor for board discussion and a vote on the SAU budget. Yep.
I'm still Martin Goulet
Great.
of Amherst. So I noticed on the agenda is an item on the what I guess has been referred to for months and months and months as the Glover matter. I just want to remind the board that there are a host of unanswered questions with respect to how that process played out. And I hope you revisit those questions as part of your deliberations this evening and come to some efficient way to answer those outstanding questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Seeing none, let's move on. Let's go ahead to our SAU board opportunity to open discussion and vote on our fiscal year 2024 budget. Any comments, any motions, anything on the floor? Ms. Grunt.
So I had that sounds really loud. I had the benefit of sitting through the budget committee's meetings, and I have to say they had some really good questions. Amy, seriously, fantastic job. Yeah, you were on top of answering those questions faster than I could open up the spreadsheet and see they were in there. And I think it made the process very open. I think they got their questions answered very thoroughly. Steve was there at each of the meetings and really did a nice job answering a lot of their questions. A lot of look at different salary levels and things like that, as you heard from their prior comments. But to be honest with you, I have to say going through that, I felt really comfortable where we are in the budget. Very few questions. I think the recommendations, there are some for us to consider and contemplate over the next year. Again, I'm not a fan of knee-jerk reactions, so I kind of want to make sure that we look at them before we do anything. But I feel good where we are personally.
And to piggyback on that, I think some of the recommendations we can act upon immediately, like having our office staff, once things calm down from a budgetary standpoint, do our analysis from a pay standpoint. Talking about sort of working with our HR director to have our proper evaluation process. So like all of that stuff, I think is stuff that we don't necessarily need to weigh in on, but just basically require our interim superintendent to get that ball rolling. I think the new vision of our new superintendent that we're going through a pretty robust and decent process to find. I would love to get that individual, he or her, opinion on some of these things, right? And so the warrant items, like I mentioned earlier in the public hearing, talking about the raise pool, is it enough? Is it too much, right? And so there may be some potential ways in coordinating our new leaders pay that would be then tied to the passing of our various budgets for each district, right? And so hypothetical, one district does not pass, there could be actually some pulled back from our new leaders' annual raise, just making that up, right? And so there could be some other things that we can also implement to create that accountability on behalf of our new leader. So I do like the idea of studying the idea for a warrant article for all three school boards and then allowing each board to make a decision after that process is done. So thank you. And I do support the budget as written. Ms. Cooley-Zimmerman.
I was gonna say, I agree with a lot of what has been said. I appreciate the committee's work and I just want to add the one interesting position that we're in this year is that we are operating basically without two assistant superintendents. So I certainly hope that both our current assistant superintendents will share their thoughts on that with our new superintendent, whoever that is. You know, because it gives us the opportunity to look at what wasn't done. Were we able to do everything with this kind of staffing? And that gives us a really good idea going forward of the pros and cons. I mean, it's a kind of unique opportunity the way it's fallen in this situation. So I think we should definitely be looking at that. But I agree that's a decision for down the road.
Thank you. Mr. Glover.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear that the numbers look good to the committee. That gives me confidence to go ahead and have this vote tonight. General as a principal, hearing new information, fresh recommendations hot off the press, and then making a decision is not good practice. Ideally, we would take the recommendations, think, ask questions, have follow-up, and then come back in December and vote on this budget. But it really, the recommendations are about the future, I think, is what I'm hearing and what I've read. So I'm not going to stand in the way of what is otherwise a budget that is satisfactory to the committee. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Thank you. Any other comments? Ms. Clark, do you have any comments?
No, I echo what everyone else has said, that I think a lot of these things are implementable now and others should be done in discussion with the future superintendent so that we can get the full context to make an informed decision. So I'm comfortable with the budget as is.
Great, thank you. So seeing no other comments, someone like to make a motion to, and the exact wording is to adopt, Ms. Facey? Adopt the proposed fiscal year 2024 SAU budget as presented.
We'd like that very much.
I'll make that motion.
Made by Ms. Cooley-Zimmerman, second by Ms. Grund. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, starting off with Mr. Glover.
Glover, yes.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Peters, yes.
Grund, yes.
Cooley-Zimmerman, yes.
Eckhoff, yes.
Lawrence, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Yes.
Conklin, yes.
White, yes.
Parisi, yes.
Beam, yes.
Ms. Clark.
Clark, yes.
Thank you. That motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Next item on the agenda is our host building remarks. And so everyone knows that we started off doing a roadshow for our SAU board meetings into all of our various buildings. So we could all get a firsthand experience of what it's like to be present in those. Some of us have either never been or rarely set foot in those buildings. We're going to stop that just because of the audio visual issues, which obviously are here tonight as well. Audio visual issues with some of our meetings that we've had specifically at the Wilkins School that are creating challenges from a record keeping standpoint for our note taker. So we're going to put a temporary pause on that until we're able to upgrade our technology to better support the roadshow. But with that said, we are here. Tonight was our opportunity to learn a little bit more about the Sauhegan High School, the building, the physical infrastructure, and so forth. So Ms. Grund, the chairwoman of our Sauhegan Cooperative School District, would you like to go ahead and provide some commentary?
Sure, I'm going to keep it short because we discuss a lot of things at our school board meeting and we meet here on a regular basis. But you know, one of the things that we've had the experience of this year are our skylights are starting to leak. Our building is 30 years old. Actually, this is our 30th year at the high school. It'll be our 30th graduating class. So pretty big milestone for us. So our buildings are a lot newer than the middle school and the elementary school. But they are, they do show age over time, and we want to thank Roger for all of his hard work, getting everything back in place, and he's working hard with his team to really keep our building in a safe environment for our students. So again, our skylights are one of the big things. Right now, we have some basically plastic covering to keep them from leaking in. So we have a 3-phase process to be able to do some replacements on those. But phase 1 is going to start within the next year, and each of them are going to be $300 to $350 some $1,000. So instead of hitting it all one year, we're able to phase it in over multiple years. We've recently installed a new secure front entrance. If you've come in during the school day at all, you'll find that you have to come through. We no longer have the welcome center where you walk into the building and it's wide open to everybody. There's actually an airlock area which controls our visitors coming in and out. From what I understand, it's working well. We've recently had our theater inspected. We've noted some needed repairs. We used to have an employee that did some repairs over time, but it's at the point 30 years later, it's time to put some work in. So that is currently in our budget. Carpet replacements coming up. And then one of the other things is our scoreboard. Our scoreboard is showing a lot of wear and tear. And so we're in the process of figuring out what the right thing to do is to do that, to whether it's a replace, probably not a repair from my understanding. We're looking for different ways to get either a sponsorship or raise some donation funds to see what we can do to do that, to repair that. But overall, it's, typical maintenance, and other than some of those big items.
If you just quickly address the baseball.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say that during our update. So last meeting, we accepted a $90,000, up to a $90,000 donation for a hitting development center at the high school. This allows 2 basically tunnels to be built that will hold equipment and other ways for our baseball students to practice. And it was through a private donation. So that is going to be built in the near future.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Grund and the physical infrastructure here at the high school? Seeing none. Thank you very much for that update. Moving on to our consent agenda. Let's go ahead and do them one by one. Anybody have any issues with item number 1? Treasurer's report. Item number 2, draft minutes for 10/27/22. Item number 3, draft minutes for 11/3/22. Item number 4, facilities update. Item number 5, enrollment update. Mr. Glover.
So Egan's now less than 700. I saw. So families move out, homeschool, private school, there's quite a change in the middle. You know?
And I do think we've had a couple move out recently, but I'll follow up to Vine. I think Stephanie asked me to do that too. So I'm collecting that data as we speak.
Okay. I didn't have the mic on, just for the record. I had asked about a drop in enrollment at Sauhegan from 700 to 698. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. So, no other questions. Let's entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Motion by Mr. Gothier, second. Second by Mr. Conklin. Seeing no discussion, let's go ahead and do a roll call vote. Mr. Glover.
Glover, yes.
Torres, yes. Yes.
Peters, yes.
Grund, yes.
Gulay Zimmerman, yes.
Yes.
Lawrence, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Yes.
Conklin, yes.
White, yes.
Creasy, yes.
Beam, yes.
Ms. Clark.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Clark. All right, let's move on to the next item, our board chair update. Let's start off with the town of Amherst, Mr. Gothier.
All right, so we had our most recent meeting last Thursday. We got round 2, draft 2 of our budget. Overall, we're at a 4.1% increase right now, aside from miscellaneous corrections and adjustments to salaries, benefits, et cetera. We did have our largest increase come in our technology budget. After we met with the technology subcommittee, it was recommended that we put back on the budget, or put back in the budget about $70,000 for a one-to-one computer to student program in the 5th grade, something we'd had on there in the last couple of years and removed as we were looking for ways to decrease the budget easily and efficiently. So it is back on there for now. We have not voted on that, obviously, and will not until our December meeting. We do meet again December 6th to discuss the merits of that, whether a one-to-one is correct now, if that's the right way to go, or if it's better to do a 2-to-1 still and use that money elsewhere, or get under 4% to make sure that we're not working on a default in back-to-back years, which can be detrimental to a school district. Elsewhere, we had a presentation from Assistant Superintendent Landworld regarding our curriculum changes for the English Language Arts program. This is part of a year-long look we're doing at curriculum. At every meeting, we'll have a presentation on some aspect of the curriculum. At some point, we will look at the math program. We'll do that a couple of times this year because it's the first year of a new math program for K through 5 to see how that is fitting in. I believe it's a program that resembles what Mount Vernon has been doing, and they've seen great success with that as well. So we'll be looking at different areas of curriculum, but the English Language Arts was our first look this last month. For facilities, we spent a lot of time here, per usual, discussing what's going on with Amherst Middle School. And one of the initiatives of the interim superintendent for the Amherst buildings is to make them watertight. We've seen that in Sauhegan. It's sort of an unrelated project there, but it is still an initiative to make the buildings watertight. So we have roughly 100,000 coming out of our capital reserve fund to look at projects to make Amherst Middle School watertight, including replacing unit ventilators and then working on some rooftop stuff. And then probably somewhere in the range of $1.5 million to fix those out of the CRF over the coming years once we get the proposals back for that. We were also looking at the Clark Wilkins project, discussing that project. We found out last week or 2 weeks ago that our project ranked 7th in the state in terms of the building state aid applications. And so some of the schools that we were ranked up against were districts that are a little bit different than us socioeconomically. But we were ranked 7th, which I think this board and the administration felt that that was really a high recognition of the need that we have for Clark Wilkins to be ranked 7th out of 17 projects. The odds of there being any money there, I don't know if anybody's betting on that at this point, but we're certainly showcasing the need for that with independent parties that are going to attempt to give us money if there's money available. And really our biggest detriment was the free and reduced lunch population. We don't have a large population of that in Amherst, and that counts for 200 points on that application. You can view that application and all the details that went in it. And thank you to Roger Preston and Amy Facey for working on that for the bulk of the summer to get that ready to go for July 1st. But that application and the complexities of it and the details of it are available at the library. And then speaking of old-fashioned printed out materials, you can actually get a curriculum binder that has all of our curriculum outlined for K through 8 in Amherst School District down at the Brick School. That is now available. Miss Landworld and Mr. Chamberlain worked on that over the last 6 to 8 months early as well. Miss Parisi was played a big part in that as well. Last thing I'll say about facilities is that we, Josh and Victoria and some of the board members for Amherst spent election day manning a table talking about the Clark Wilkins project. And we had dozens of families that signed up for us to be able to add another aspect of communication with the community for this project. They've signed up essentially to be volunteers to host the board and host community discussions in their households to talk about this project, talk about the need for the project. Yet another way that we're trying to get the word out there with limited resources to be able to really communicate as well as we would want to. Singing song and dance outside of everybody's house, that probably won't work. But if we can do some of this to add to the other initiatives that we have underway to get the word out there about this project and the need for this project, we're thankful for those families to sign up, and we'll be coordinating that with them over the coming months between now and Election Day. Victoria, did I miss anything facilities wise?
Yeah. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gothier? So I'm going to ask Mr. Vayu, not to put you on the spot, sorry. With funding going to the building aid, is that typically allocated in January as the budget process starts or the biennium happens, or? Okay, cool. Veteran. So out of the top 7, do we know like what numbers are ahead of you guys, like for requests?
Was it Manchester that was some 80 million, Victoria, or Concord?
It was big money.
Yeah. All right. Well, that answers that. Thank you.
But they have to pass.
It's true. Yeah. Okay.
And then I was told that we may not know until
I think a lot of it will depend on how the budget goes this year and what gets put in for that, for building aid.
Cool. Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot. Next, let's head up to the metropolis of Mount Vernon. Miss Lawrence.
Thank you. The Mount Vernon School Board met on November 3rd. We had a couple of updates. Our enrollment is currently at 212 students, which is up 2 from the last time I let you know what we're at. We had a delightful video presentation from our 3rd grade students walking us through the day in the life of a 3rd grader. Delightful to watch 3rd graders walk you through their day. Again, if you have time and want to go watch the video presentation from that meeting, it's just it'll lift your spirits. We then talked about our budget and had a preliminary budget presentation. Our proposed budget is just over 6.3 million, which is an 8.1% increase over this year. The default calculation is 6.6% above this year as well. Major drivers for that are an increase in our student services costs. We have an increase in our tuition to AMS. We have some salary adjustments also, bringing our food service, our facilities and our administrative support personnel to a more reasonable salary range, small adjustments there. We plan to do continued investment in our facilities. We've got a HVAC duct replacement project that is almost fully complete, I believe. And then we also are continuing with our long-term capitals facility plan. We have a few warrants that are proposed or planning to be proposed. We'll be looking at this again at our next meeting, which is December 1st. We're looking at that property maintenance fund. We are looking at establishing a students with disabilities fund, primarily to help even out the impact of some special education costs in our town. Even one student can dramatically sway our budget. And then we're also looking at a health insurance fund because again, our budget is so small that if a staff member elects to take or change their health insurance during the year, it can again dramatically impact our budget. And that is required. So we would be in a real pickle if that were to happen. So we're just looking to keep things as steady and stable as possible. And then finally, we are looking at asking our taxpayers to consider a 7th and 8th grade relocation study. This would be $60,000 set aside to assess whether or not it would be viable to bring 7th and 8th grade into the town of Mount Vernon in one of several models. Who knows what that would look like exactly. So this warrant is just basically taking the temperature of the community to see whether or not the community is interested in even taking that next step to pursue what that would look like in our town. Next meeting's December 1st. Be there or be square. Thanks.
I love the new banners in the gym, by the way. I think they look awesome. Any questions for Ms. Lawrence? Seeing none, let's go over to the Sohegan Cooperative School District. Ms. Grunt.
Sure, thank you. We I had our meeting 2 weeks ago. The first thing, we had accepted a donation for our hitting development, which I spoke about before. So that's okay. It's okay to say it twice because we're very thankful for the family's donation. We had a great presentation from our special ed administrator, Katie Rawl. She's new this year. She's looking at our coverage for all of our paras and our students. She's reviewing our education process, ensure a proper environment and strong program for all of our students. So we're very excited about her enthusiasm and her new critical eye of looking at how we work here at Sohegan. We approved a field trip for our Spanish students to Costa Rica. So yay, we're getting back on track with our trips that our students typically do. We're getting back into the groove we were in. We looked at our budget. Of course, we have an increase of approximately 3%. We have some small changes I know that are being looked at for some salaries to look between budget and defaults, which might reduce our budget slightly. So we have our 3rd review coming up in December. We have some warrant articles. One of them's for the turf field. Instead of asking for the 85,000 like we had to do in the past, we're only asking for 70. We realized looking at the budget where we stand and what the total is going to look at, so we actually can reduce what our ask is. We have our analysis of our capital maintenance fund, and we're looking at $220,000 to go into that for this year based on Roger's analysis and breakout of all the work, including the skylights that need to be done. We're creating a technology fund so we can even out the cost to our taxpayers. We realize in the next coming years, we have some big costs coming for some switches and some other equipment. So Brian's creating a plan very similar to what Roger does. So we're going to have a technology fund to smooth out to the taxpayer the rate, which I love having a plan for future look and keeping things at smooth for the taxpayer. And we found that, or Amy found through review, an unfunded retirement liability that we're looking at why it was created and how we can possibly use that for our other payments that we might need to make. So that is something we're looking at. And then the last thing I just want to say, we had our fall play this last weekend. I hope everyone had a chance to go see it. It was wonderful. The kids did a great job. I want to say congratulations to our football team. Although they didn't win the championship, they still played great and they made it to the championship. So congratulations to them. Our co-ed golf team won the Division II championship. We have lots of things going on. So that's what's happening. Lots of good things.
I just didn't want the other boards to feel neglected as far as the technology plan. So we are having Brian develop a 5-year plan for all of the districts for technology.
Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Some good stuff going on. Any questions for Ms. Grunt? Seeing none? Oh, yeah.
There's one thing that I forgot to add, and it's really worth calling out, is we had a really wonderful presentation by the Amherst Middle School principal about our transition, our students transitioning into the middle school. And I just wanted to say it's a great collaborative effort, and the board was really impressed with the efforts that have been made on behalf of our students transitioning. So I just wanted to call that out, and I'm sorry I forgot it my first. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, let's do next item on our agenda, the superintendent search update with Mr. Conklin.
Thank you. So first, I just want to thank the subcommittee for their continued hard work and Dr. Ken DeBenedictis for his continued guidance. At our last meeting, we drafted our 13-member screening committee. I look forward to working with board members, administrators, teachers, support staff, and community as we dig into applications in late November. The plan is that at our December SAU meeting, this board shall be presented with the top 3 to 5 candidates and have a robust discussion about those candidates. We will then decide who to bring forward for further interviews and community events. So that is the plan at this point.
Great. Any questions? Mr. Glover.
The time to put an application in closed,
Yes.
right? How many applications did we receive?
So the advice I got from Dr. DeBenedictis is to not necessarily reveal the final number for some reason. I follow up with him about that. I don't know why that is an issue, but he was feeling good about the applications. I can say that, but he mentioned offhand that, we shouldn't necessarily talk in public about total numbers.
Okay.
I don't know why.
More than one?
More than one. Yes.
Less than 50?
Less than 50.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Vane.
In generalities, he mentioned what would be a good number of applicants. Did we come close
We
to that
hit
number?
that benchmark, I would say, in his view. Yes.
Thank you. Awesome. Seeing no other questions, let's move on to our superintendent's report. Mr. Chamberlain.
Sure, and thank you for the patience in getting packets piecemeal. It's as I said in writing the interim report, superintendent report, it's really nice to reflect monthly on the work. Certainly, there's some things rising near term. That's both the calendar and start time. We put together, there's probably, after meeting with leadership team today, we're going to add a 4th survey to get families in the K-1, 2 in the that area. And we do think we have to reframe some questions to get to the elementary youngsters, but we're going to do that. So I'm also working with the data science class at Sauhegan and an honors contract, working closely with a youngster on an honors contract at Sauhegan. So we've got some work to do, but there'll be a lot of feedback, and certainly if there's some feedback in the surveys, hoping to get that out a week after Thanksgiving or so, and get that ready for as the board setting their calendar to make a decision on late start in February. So we're preparing all that information, all the data for you, ready to make that decision in February. School calendar, I'm pushing CTE folks to get going on sending us information because they're kind of holding us up. But regardless, we'll get that going in December because we got to adopt a calendar. It's fascinating to come budget season. Everybody laughs. I thought I could do some of the, as Anna's talked about, some of the assistant superintendent stuff that I did last year, but with 4 budgets, three to 4 budgets, like 7 budgets working through. Stephen asked me before this what I really like about this work. Every day I get to learn. My training is annual school district meeting and not SB2, not default. So digging in with Amy on that and taking a look at that is great. Truly thankful and very appreciative to be here as your interim superintendent. I get to go to work every day trying to help people, trying to learn and trying to make this place fulfill the promise of public education, which I think is uniquely qualified to do. And also thank you. You've all been very patient with timing and supplementing packets and board notes the day of meetings. I just appreciate your patience with me very much. So thanks for your support.
Great. And in the spirit of Thanksgiving season, right? So I will say I've been able to see firsthand your effort, your dedication, and your commitment to this community on an interim basis. I'm inspired. And the fact that you bring your passion to not only us as board members, but your faculty, your staff, it is extremely appreciated by me, by my family, by my community. And I'm looking around the room. I bet you every single person on this board would actually say the same. I know this has been very challenging for you, but your efforts definitely are noticed. They're noted by me and us, and we really, truly appreciate you. Thank you.
Incredibly. No. Cut that out. Cut that out. No, I thank you. I truly get to work with people every day I get to learn from. It's a gift. You gave me a gift. I'm very lucky to sit in this seat and connect with you all. So, but thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. Any questions for our superintendent? Ms. Gloria Zimmerman.
I have one question and one comment. First, I noticed a reference to Department of Labor coming in because there'd been a lot of, is it injuries? Is it the workers' comp division that came in? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And is it across all the schools? Or is it a particular issue?
Sure. So we, anytime there's an accident in school, anytime, so we report it and it goes to Primex, and Primex reports it to the Department of Labor. So what spurred it was a higher than usual number of student staff related incidences at one of our elementary schools. Why I put it in the SAU report was they toured every school, spent time 45 minutes to an hour in all our schools. Christine and Amina have spent a lot of time working with them. From my standpoint, I've seen the effort in having all the infrastructure and systems that Christine leads with Amina with this group. So I felt very, very confident that we are in the top of compliance with Department of Labor trainings and all that piece. And they did reaffirm that. So they came back for a second visit. There are some recommendations I think I wrote about in the report about some observations that the admin will be doing, which we like to do. And frankly, at Clark Wilkins, one of the issues there is simply space. That the Department of Labor understood why there might be at that school more issues than others is because simply proximity. We don't have the space for the programmatic needs for kids and the space for doing it. There's some proximity issues that by that itself cause some stuff. So it was a good experience, but it was a good experience because of the work Christine and everybody's done trying to make sure we're compliant.
Thank you. And then my other question was regarding the survey for the school start time. I think the questions are fine. No objection to that. I think we may want to change a tiny bit the headings, because if I'm new, like if I moved here last year, what, you know, what is your feeling about the new start time? Is a little,
We worked on that. Thank you. And
Okay.
Christine had some of the same. So I did some changes today as we went and some other, you're 100% right. So it's, for some it is a change and for some it is their only, and we're going to make that distinguish, but thank you. That was noticed as well.
yeah, something at the beginning, just, you know, we're looking for feedback on the new start times, 7:30 and you know, something like that, so that there's a little perspective, but
Appreciate the feedback very much.
no, and thank you for your work on it.
Ms. Grant.
Sure, so thank you. Just a quick follow-up to the start time. One suggestion I would love to see is a actual boxes where people can give feedback. Like, because for me, it's a lot of times understanding what the comment is and why they're making that choice of a 7 versus a 3 or an 8 versus a 2 can make a difference
You got it.
on understanding the impact. So I'd love to see some comment boxes that would
Thank
say, why'd you say this? Or some feedback that way. The other just quick question on the waiting on the CTE schedules, do they typically, we usually fall close within their timeframes, right? In the past, we've
The
never done
alignment.
that. Yeah,
So
there's something changing?
so like something very simple, if our late starts are different than their early releases, those are days out of compliance.
Oh.
So we can make a simple change if we have from the very beginning align those days. So the law says you have to be, you can't be out of compliance more than 10 days. If someone starts at like say 3 days after and we start 3 days before, that could be 6 days out of compliance.
That's what,
Plus the late starts and we're at 16.
gotcha.
So some of the low hanging fruit is just
And is this a new guidance?
yeah, it's
That's
this
okay.
might be
That's
the
it.
first or second year of the statute.
The 10 days is new.
Okay, that's it, because I don't remember that coming up in the past.
And so that's
Good.
why if I put it out there with all the late starts, because that's not, I mean, no one really matters as long as they know early when the late start is.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to hit it early.
Perfect.
And I'm the one actually nagging the CTE folks. I'm not usually the nag, but I'm the nag.
Because it's not their school calendar. We're worried about our school calendar more than they're worried about theirs, right? Because we're the ones that really have to be in
But
compliance.
they're trying to, we're unique. We send them to 4 CTE centers.
Right.
So the 4 CTE centers are trying to align and then we align with them. And that's,
A lot.
so I'm on it. But eventually we're gonna have to go.
Make a decision.
Gonna have to go.
Okay, thank you.
No. Any other comments? Ms. B?
So well. There we go. I just really want to thank you for the work that's gone into the surveys, because I feel like definitely you've addressed every different category of stakeholder. And I really appreciate that. And I know that it's always been our thought that we had good reasons, we tried it, but that we were going to evaluate and we were going to say, is it working for us? Is it not? And as someone who was a proponent for, I stand by my reasons for, but I am not against if we really look at it and go, hey, we did our best, but because we didn't have enough other districts following us, because this, because that, it just isn't working for us. Having a lot of data to go by, I think is essential. And so thank you for the thought that has gone into that. And I really was pleased with all the different ones. Is like, oh, look, another, and hey, and I think that everyone is extremely important. So.
Mr. Coffey.
Just one recommendation to look at and it may not be something we know for another couple of months now, but if we do end up doing the early releases in February and March, can we go to early releases all next year for the professional development? Can we do that? Whereas that way we're not messing up we're sticking to that same early release schedule that the vocational schools are, as opposed to doing late starts. I don't know if that makes a difference, but
I think late starts in one contract, aren't they? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll take a look at that. But one of the ideas, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes about why we went to the latest, trying to get some feedback and see if that model is a little bit better. Yeah. So we're going to try to do it.
I think you're going to find that that's more convenient for parents for care too, for kids, as opposed to having to have them hang around till 9 o'clock if you're trying to get early meetings and or whatnot. So
yeah, I agree. And you'll hear about, but I did meet with all the associations about making the change from the morning to the afternoon. So I worked with everybody.
Awesome. And I think just the whole concept of the professional development done throughout the year with the late starts, the whole thing needs to be revisited. It's very very old. It's been around since the late eighties, early nineties. Yeah, and well, it was even before them when Amherst was in Milford. So, you know, that's when it kind of started and then it transitioned over here. So thinking out of the box, is there a better way to do it or accomplish what we're trying to do from a PD standpoint? So thank you. Any other questions or comments for our superintendent? Seeing none, let's move on to our JFAC update. Mr. Coogan.
For two. All right, let's see where we're at here. See if I can actually read, because my eyes are not going. I'm falling apart piece by piece. All right, so the last time I think we met up, the recommendation has been made by JFAC to the Amherst School Board about moving forward with a building project, which I think all know. The Mount Vernon Village School, as you heard from Sarah's evening, they're looking at exploring options, but there's just no real concrete decisions at this point in time. The last time we met with JFAC, which was probably about almost 3 weeks ago now, we really focused on the Sauhegan board. And the recommendation at that point was to move forward with looking at some of the structural needs of the Sauhegan School District. They're really broken down into 5 different categories. Probably the first one to look at was, though there was an exploration of the annex at this point in time due to some work that the board is looking at from a curriculum perspective, it just was not appropriate to consider the annex at this stage until the curriculum is flushed out. Because as all of you would very well know, that would potentially impact the space needs within the district, within the building, based on those curriculum decisions. So that has been put on pause. But as you heard from Ms. Grun earlier, there are definitely some system issues that would be put forward. So the recommendation is that in looking at health, one of the key aspects is looking at things like carpets, classroom furniture, and some weight room rehabilitation. Which would probably be addressed through some self-funding through capital reserve funds. In addition, from a systems perspective, this is really get some of the bigger ticket items. So as has been addressed, the skylights, you're looking at just under $1.5 million for those replacements over the next 7 years. Phased out in 3 parts, a piece going in 24 for $314K, piece in 25 going for 300, and a piece in 29 going for 643. The biggest ticket item coming up is the HVAC system. I mean, a kind of wet finger in the air earmark is around 17 million. So I mean, you could go through capital reserves and continue to build that up. We're nearing end of life for those systems and faculties. So those will be decisions for the board. The last 2 items in that segment were around generators for the annex, as well as some mixing valves for the water heaters. As relates to safety, one of the key issues that was observed was getting a card swipe system for the entire Sauhegan complex, and as well increased security to the annex facility. As we look at the grounds, was briefly touched upon around the turf system, there also is some needs from ADA compliant structural stands for the football field, as well as potential replacement for the scoreboard, and just general overall upkeep of all of the grounds that are being used across the complex. That's it. That's all my update. Any questions?
Great, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Coogan? One quick question, your meetings, which nights are those held in, where, and how can people find information?
They're held at 5 p.m. the second Tuesday of each month at the Brick School.
Great. And then right on the SAU website, we're able to.
That is correct. You can find access to materials through the SAU website or from the JFAC website directly.
Are you guys going to be doing videos this year to support the warrant article for the elementary school to make sure that stuff's out there in the community as well?
So now that we finalized recommendations, so that has been complete. So there will be no more recommendations coming from JFAC until we sit in front of the Sauhegan board. But beyond that, now it's really moving towards the communications plan. So we're looking to get direction from each of the boards on how you might want us to help you in that area. Videos absolutely can be approach. As Victoria mentioned earlier, we've had this concept of pushing out into the community and trying to get as much awareness as possible by sitting out in front of the buildings on those lovely balmy election days, or heading out in the village area. I think one of the ideas the team has is really try to talk about like pushing in. welcome us into your home, grab groups of your local community, invite us to sit at a table with you and, proverbially break bread and really have open and honest discussions to best understand for the community what is it that you're looking for, because that's our ultimate goal. We're trying to look at what the demands are, what the needs are that are basic, fundamental aspects of educating students in this community, and then what does the community need? Is you just can't keep writing blank checks and hoping things go well. That's not a prudent thing to do, and I don't think that's what we're setting out to do. We're trying to figure out how do we best balance what the community wants, what the needs of our educational services are, and try to put forward the best product for the town.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Ms. Beam.
As always, I want to thank you for all the great work that this committee has done over many, many years now.
As you know, it's a lot of people.
I do. And it's a rotating bunch, which is something that I think is really important to remember. That it is not the same, 5 or 6 people who are like, well, how about now? It's really been a lot of experts and a lot of people with a lot of points of view from the community. And so I think that always bears reminding. And I would like to echo your request that we would love to come and talk with people directly. We were out on, and it was so nice the few days before, and man, election day was it's chilly. But we, had 4 pages of people that we would like to send more information to and who have offered to come and host talking to. I know that because we have one of the largest projects that is being proposed as a school board, we have committed to having a member show up to every one of those opportunities to speak directly with people. And so we are really asking that you, we would love to come talk to you. I think that so much more gets done, and that's certainly my sweet spot is a small group as opposed to public speaking. And so I would really love to come in and spend time with more people, because the other thing that Election Day pointed out is when I feel like I know everyone in town, sitting there, I realize I do not. And we really want to be able to reach, especially a lot of new people who are here, and tell you what's going on and really answer your questions very directly. So please invite us. We will come.
Thank you, Ms. Beam.
Just to add on to Terry's comments, I do agree that there's been kind of a core group of people that have been focused on this for the last 5 years, but every single year we've asked for more people to become involved. We want diversity of opinion and thought. And though we went through and did the analysis, whether it be with, local community members, faculty, administration, experts who were hired and giving us the best advice, the best insights into what's right to do for the community, we landed on what we deemed to be necessary. There are core fundamental issues that we have with the facilities in particular at the lower elementary school level that need to be addressed. We've tried to come up, there's significant needs that need to be done at the middle school that we were looking at last year from economic and capital perspective. It was the right thing to do to try to push forward from an economics perspective to capitalize on historically low interest rates. That was the right thing to do for the community last year. That has materially changed as we've all seen interest rates rising every quarter. Our view is that these buildings all still need to be addressed, as we said last year. That has not changed. However, the economic aspects of doing that fiscally sound for this community has changed. And we've tried to take in that feedback to figure out what is the right approach for the community, balancing both needs from an academic perspective for students, but also the fiscal aspects of it for the community, and balance those two and calibrate as we're getting feedback from the community. Well, we're not wavering from what the needs are. And as you've walked through these schools, I mean, I didn't know about the Department of Labor issue that came up. This is the first I've heard of it, but that to me just echoes, like, if we're putting our administration, our faculty, even our students at risk, if we're at a higher probability of risk for accidents, what's the next thing that's going to happen? I mean, this is like a snowball effect. If you have higher propensity for accidents, you have higher insurance premiums. Do we ever get to the point where they just have to shut the schools down? Like, these are the things that go through my head. As I've been a risk professional my entire career. I look at the probability of those types of things happening, and this is a problem for our community, that we're not just talking about, fixing a window or a skylight or, a leaky ceiling. We're talking about, like, does a building collapse? Do we have lawsuits against us? Like, that's where my head goes. And we've got to find ways to address these circumstances that we put ourselves into, because we've chosen not to fix and address some of these issues as we should have 20, 30, 40 years ago. and we're not at a head where we're at a crossroads of like, either we just say scrap it and let the thing fall apart, or we do have to make some sort of community reinvestment back into ourselves to fix and address these issues that have been stagnating for decades.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Great, thank you, Mr. Coogan.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda was a part of our new business list. It was a member of the community that reached out and said they wanted to actually receive an update on the safety and security processes and procedures and protocols and trainings for our district. And so Mr. Chamberlain is going to go ahead and address that.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. So just a little bit about the process. So last year when I arrived, it was clear from the very beginning of our leadership team retreats that Adam very much prioritized safety and security. We actually met as a team and did some scenarios in the first summer. He made sure that there was radio communication all over the place and make sure it worked with daily radio checks. And then the discussions came and he had started the process about the next iteration of training regarding intruders in our schools. For years, the plan in schools was to lock down, hide, and wait, and try to make yourselves hidden in schools. The research has changed, and now there's different approaches. This staff, our SROs and our police staff had already begun the process of being trained in Alice. Even the leadership team, I think right before COVID, at the beginning of COVID, it did Alice training. So the wheels were set in motion. When I was transitioning, part of the entry plan for me, Adam and I visited all of the police departments and met with the SROs. And one of the uniformly at Mount Vernon and Amherst, there was the priority for me was by the end of this year, get all staff trained, faculty and staff trained in Alice. That was our goal. We had started that on the October release day. The Sauhegan faculty and staff was trained. And as you heard before, we changed the calendar to have early releases as opposed to delayed openings. There's some things very unique that actually these are the first public schools that I've seen with a different and the ability to actually have a lockdown alarm with a blue light. So Sauhegan, Amherst, and Mount Vernon schools have, instead of a fire alarm pull, they actually have a lockdown pull. And I'd never seen that in public schools. Actually, Roger and I talked about it today. He's not sure of another public school that does that as well. So if you think there's a reason for lockdown, you pull, blue lights goes, the doors close, and the police get notified, which is just a real significant training piece. And it's fascinating for me to watch. So I did have an opportunity this year. Heather Blaze trained the Sauhegan staff. And then in February, we'll be training Clark Wilkins in Mount Vernon. And then in March, we'll do Amherst Middle School. And we will meet our goals that both police chiefs felt very strongly that it was important this year. We train all our staff in the Alice training. Next year, we'll roll it out to the students, of course, to the families first. And one of the reasons why Alice training, it's evolved over time, but it's, as I noted in the memo and talking with the officers that have been trained in this, it is developing appropriate training. So kindergartens have a different experience than juniors and seniors in high schools and over time. And one of the things that's really important and why we as a leadership team made a commitment in working with our SROs and the both police departments is we are adopting this plan, because when a Mount Vernon youngster matriculates to Amherst, we want the same training, right? Amherst goes to Sauhegan. So having one plan that is already trained, that we have members of the administration already trained, some members of our police department already trained, see the most efficient way to accomplish this. If we went in a different way this year, then we would have to actually go backwards. And I talked with Chief Slavin today. There's a plan to have a Mount Vernon police officer trained, because one thing that Tom, the principal of Mount Vernon Village School, really would like the training in that, right? You want the training in the school so you can see the surrounding, everybody's comfortable. And we have full expectation that we will do that in February and March. I just really want to emphasize, and when I met with a community member on Friday to talk about our structures in our schools, that we really are safety conscious. We really do work on scenarios and all this work, and it's really great to see that it is a priority. But this is the next step, and trying to train in a developmentally appropriate way. our faculty and staff, our students and our communities about what, the next research and evidence-based shows how we keep kids safe. So that's where we are. We're going to keep moving. We have great people doing it. And I'm looking forward to continuing this evolution as I articulated a draft of an implementation plan that'll go through next year. Happy to answer any questions. Heather and Chief Slavin, they were willing to come. I wasn't sure about the time tonight. Heather said I was planning on staying through tonight, but I thought 8 o'clock on a Monday before Thanksgiving, but she's also around and Officer Sarah's around. They'll answer any questions anytime, but it's very much a team place. We're all on the same page, and I appreciate all districts willing to change the calendar in February, March. And those dates will be sent out right after the holiday, the Thanksgiving break, when I do all the late start stuff.
Ms. Beaton and then Ms. Grunt.
No, there you go. First off, thank you. I cannot say enough. I was just reading this week, actually, an article about SROs and whether they are a healthy thing to have in schools. And in many school districts, they're really not, because they criminalize behavior of kids. And I feel like in our schools, that's very much not the case. I think they are a partnership. I think that they are a support to our students. And I think that they are a very visible thing to the outside community that may or may not wish us well. And so I think that right off right there, we do it right. And I appreciate all of the time and effort that they put into getting to know our students and really working with our administration. I'm a little bit familiar with Alice, and I'm really happy to see us moving towards a more proven. I mean, I have done active shooter training. I'm on our both community and Nashua CERT team. I am really familiar in a lot of this, but I know that not everyone is, and I know you cannot share specifics, but can you share a couple of differences in Alice versus what we have been doing traditionally?
Sure. And Alice is based around teachers making their best judgment based on the circumstances at that time, including leaving the school. And that's really the biggest difference, is that if there's you look out and in your area there's an exit and there's things going on, you just go. And leaving the school is the biggest change, because what they found when people were locked down and stayed, that's when harm came as opposed to leaving. So it's all about empowering teachers to make the best decision that they can at that moment, and give them the tools to do it and train it enough so they feel comfortable doing it and taking care of the most precious cargo. This is, and Terry, to your point, this is my first experience in working with SROs. Last year, as the assistant superintendent for secondary, it was not uncommon for Joe to give me a call. Steve, can you come on over? Can we talk about a youngster? Heather, the same thing. I met with Mike and Heather, and we dealt with a number of students, and both of them, without exception, were student-centered. How can we, what's best for the youngster? And it was not criminalization. It was how we can support, and when they bring their skills and knowledge, and we all do together. So it was my first experience ever working with SROs, and I was incredibly impressed about their desire to reach out to others, a very traditional person like me, and meet with them, talk about. And last year I did quite a bit of student support, which was really enlightening for me working with SROs.
Thank you. Ms. Grunt.
So, pretty much, very quickly, Terry pretty much took my question. Was no, it was perfect. Yeah, I was just wanting to understand what the difference was, and then like how was the practice going to look versus what our students do now, but you pretty much answered it.
In how we drill it really with what would you do? You imagine it. I remember the time when my daughter was in elementary school and she came from school and says, "Daddy, I can throw a stapler at somebody." And that was their training for the first time, that they were, that was the training, as opposed to just how I can throw a stapler. And she was very happy about that, by the way, still would be. But that's really it. We look, and there is, Heather did the training, and there's times where you do put everything you can in front of the door. That's what, if you're on the second floor, that's what you do. But it really is about being comfortable doing the best decision you can at the time, getting them comfortable with it, because it's a different mindset for folks. And that's why we did the training in the afternoon, because we're going to have some teachers wrestle with some decisions and some thoughts. And at 10 o'clock in the morning, we'd rather have them, process it at 2:30 and 3 o'clock in their own time, versus see the littles, right after. Wow. You know what I mean? So Exactly. So we think the overnight process and having them process together is a better way to do it. And I really appreciate everybody being that flexible. And I think the community will respond pretty well too.
At the risk of playing the role I played last Thursday, I'll be the contrarian. So I've been, I can't tell you how many Alice drills I've done and whatnot. And I think it's fine for the faculty to do. I have tried to find reports and there just isn't much data or even studies that have been done about training the kids in Alice and the efficacy of it. And so that's my concern.
Sure. Very fair.
I just don't know that you get, for lack of a better term, bang for your buck in terms of time. You know, we always say time is all we have. Time is our capital in schools. And is this what we want to spend our time doing with our students if it's not necessarily, I just don't see it saving lives. Training the students on it. That's my personal opinion.
No,
I'm open-minded to it, but
I
I'm
appreciate it. And time is, something I agree with. When Joe and Heather described the training to the littles, it really was something so light and just connection to listen and you know what I mean? So, but I appreciate that. And the training that I'm familiar with as a dad was simply in the afternoon, we went over, Bow High School went over and said, there's an intruder here, talk about it with your class, with this live speaker and say, where would you go? That was it, say, oh, it's over there, would we leave? And they just talk about leaving. It was that simple and just talking about being aware, just some situational awareness. And it was just minutes, they did it every once in a while. It was that low key in that sense. If this was the intruder over here, where would you go? And the teacher talked about with their kids. That's how Bow High School did.
Thank you. Ms. Parisi.
While we roll out something new for security and safety, can we just make sure that we're reaching the people who are in our buildings sometimes, our substitutes or recurring volunteers and things like that?
Thank you.
Thanks.
One last.
Sure.
So so I know we're talking about training teachers, talking about looking at training students. How's that coordination with the police departments? They trained in Alice, do they come to our trainings? How does that coordination work? So we know the communication is.
And our police officers will be doing the ones doing the training. They're the ones trained in Alice and they'll be working. Yep. And so when they go in the schools, they're going with administrators and school counselors for the littles. But they are, Heather did the training for the entire school. She did for half and then another officer did them.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none. Before we go to the next item, just a quick record keeping thing. Our next meeting in December, we're going to need to hopefully pick a date tonight before everybody leaves. There's significant conflicts on the 22nd. There's no school on the 23rd, so a lot of family members on this board are departing the area and will be unable to attend. And this is a pretty important meeting for as many of us as possible to be there as a result of the topic that'll be under discussion, which is the superintendent search. So Monday, there were significant conflicts as well. That was an alternative date for that. So we're looking at maybe Tuesday or the previous Tuesday. I don't know, Mr. Conklin, if that's too much of a conflict because of the timing you have, but we also have our Sohegan budget workshop as well, which you and I spoke about. So if we can somehow come to some sort of agreement, what works best for everyone here, then we can go ahead and we can actually get that solidified and sent off to Abby to set up. So let's pull up the calendar again. So the 20th or the 13th. So 12th and the 19th, there were conflicts.
Can I bring up
Sure.
So the question, I mean, when we had our budget workshop for Sohegan last, we really did cover everything. I know Mike is looking into one thing regarding PSAT testing and SATs to come back to us, but I think it's something we could cover in a board meeting. I'm not sure we need the workshop. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because we really covered everything thoroughly. So I think the 13th is, I think we can take the. Yeah. Yeah. So my gut says the workshop probably is not needed.
Stephen.
13th or the 20th.
The 13th.
Yeah, this is new.
Stephen.
Yeah, can we start off with,
I just say, before we get too far on the 13th, my only concern is the interviews happen that week of the 5th. So if we get delayed at all, if we end up and just preparing to come to that meeting with everything we need, I would be a little concerned that there would be a crunch. So the 20th would be certainly the preference of the subcommittee from my perspective, but
so I'm thinking, just hearing from this corner over here, the 20th is more attractive anyway. So is the 20th not work for anyone? Would that be? Okay. Our agenda will be extremely light, consent agenda, and that's basically it. We probably could. I don't see a problem. 5:30 work for everyone? Just to get an extra half an hour in there? It would be in this building, yeah, this room. The 20th? We would need to do policy, but we were told that the policy agenda would be kind of light, correct? It's light.
And I'll give you a cheat sheet.
Yep. So Ms. Lawrence is already committed to doing sort of the synopsis and the changes and the modifications and so forth. So, and if people in advance can submit those questions to Ms. Lawrence, then they can actually be prepared to answer those questions at that meeting to make it more efficient. The 20th, I'm thinking that looks good for everyone at 5:30. No? I'm sorry, you'll be in New York. Would you be able to do Zoom or? Just not driving? No. Okay. Yeah, can we just check with Kristen real fast?
It's good for me.
Great, thank you. So George, if we can do Zoom, and then Ms. Beam, did you say? Okay. Okay. Do you think we can accomplish the front loading stuff and then leave maybe policy and consent to the end? An hour and a half on superintendent search?
I mean, I can't say, I mean, I have no idea right now if it's 3, if it's 5, you know, depending on how much discussion we have. It's hard to say what we can do. I mean, we can, you know, Terry, we'll have to open the meeting, maybe take care of some business real quick and then, you know, we might. Yeah. I don't know how much you'll miss if you're not here until 5:45, 6 o'clock, but.
Can we split and do 5:45? Would that be better? Is that gonna work?
It's hard to do things at quarter hours, so if I can,
Okay. Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing that the 20th at 5:30 works for everyone. And then George will give you a super Zoom. And then Ms. Clark, it also works for you, and then we'll just reach out to Jess. Perfect. All right, so thank you. If we can just relay that to Abby, that'll be the new date. Awesome. All right. The next item on the agenda is our resolved Title IX, Title VII matter. I've received a request from a board member to add this particular item to our agenda this evening, as board members may have processed some of the information and data that was shared with the community after our last meeting. There were an opportunity to think about their thoughts and then discuss them this evening. So any board member, I'm going to open up the floor, and then we're going to deal with part 2 of this after. Ms. Beebe.
Yeah, I know it's not a good sign. I've got like papers I'm taking out. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
So tonight I did just send a copy of this as I promised. And I put a lot of thought and time into this. And so, yeah, I'm just going to start. At our board meeting on October 27th, the joint SAU board voted that having balanced the public's interest in the conduct of its elected officials and the personnel privacy interest of some personnel privacy interests of its employees, that the board authorizes redaction of any personally identifiable information regarding the complainants, and that upon completion of the necessary redaction, it released the independent investigation, appendix to investigation, initial determination of responsibility, appendix to initial determination, appeal, notice of appeal, and appellate decision relative to the complaints involving board member John Glover's conduct at the meeting of November 9th, 2021. Mr. Glover, several board members, and members of the public shared their thoughts on this matter at that same meeting. I did not, however, believe it was appropriate to discuss in detail anything related to those documents until they had been made available to the public. Now I have some thoughts of my own. After hour upon hour devoting discussions and headspace to this matter, and truthfully, a hit to my and other members' emotional well-being, dwelling on such topics, I will ask your forgiveness ahead of time that this is going to take a while. First, I'd like to address the difference between a statement of fact and a threat. Mr. Glover has repeatedly claimed that Chairman O'Keefe threatened him. In the appendix to the initial determination of responsibility, his lawyer proposed asking if Chairman O'Keefe told Mr. Glover in a meeting on November 12th, 2021, that complaints had been filed against him and that, in so many words, he had two paths to choose from. He could resign his position and all of the November 9th, 2021 meeting phone event related turmoil would go away, or else stay in office and face the consequences of an investigation, potential removal from office, and possible civil litigation. If you told your child you must clean your room to go out for ice cream after dinner, you are giving two clear paths to choose from, but only one includes ice cream. We teach our students about choices and natural consequences every day. As a professional courtesy, Chairman O'Keefe laid out two possible paths. Mr. Glover's role as an elected member of the Sohegan Cooperative School Board dictated how the SAU could proceed. If Mr. Glover voluntarily chose to resign, supportive measures for the SAU employees who reported feeling uncomfortable with him after this incident would not be required, and this would not be discussed in public, as he would have been afforded the privacy due a regular citizen rather than a sitting board member who has no expectation of privacy. At the very least, the sexual nature of the audio clip would be embarrassing to discuss in public. Fact. As an active board member, the worst case scenarios could be an investigation if deemed warranted by the Title IX coordinator, potential removal from office, and possible civil litigation. I would like to make something very clear here. Every member of this SAU board who was in office at that time was reminded that we have no direct power to remove a duly elected board member. We can vote to give a public censure to an elected member, which is like an official declaration of not cool, man. His board could have chosen to remove him from committee assignments or leadership positions. They might have eventually chosen to petition state officials to consider removal if an investigation had found him guilty of violating Title IX. However, even that would have been highly unusual and unlikely. We also live in a litigious society, and the boards have no control over civil litigation. As someone with no poker face and often strong emotions, I've often envied the way Chairman O'Keefe is able to stay calm, professional, and factual, highlighting the worst case scenarios and possible paths, even if neither was entirely desirable, was not a threat. Mr. Glover still had choices and natural consequences with either. Now, I actually attended the Lawrence Spalding Trust Committee meeting on November 9th, 2021. I was not in the room. I was one of the two board members who attended by Zoom. I very distinctly remember hearing a loud disturbance and having the line muted for a bit before we resumed. I assumed someone noisy had accidentally come into the room at the brick school or where the other board member was remotely attending. About a week later, I received a call from Chairman O'Keefe before this was discussed with the entire SAU board at a meeting on November 18th, 2021. I very much appreciate the sensitivity and respect he showed as he apologized for having to bring up the topic of pornography and acknowledged it could be very triggering. I currently serve as a court-appointed special advocate guardian ad litem, or a CASA gal, for abused and neglected children. I know firsthand there is absolute truth to pornography often being a trigger to survivors of sexual trauma. Speaking with Chairman O'Keefe definitely connected some dots for me. And then I went on to speak directly with most of the other attendees of that meeting to check on them and express how sorry I was they had been caught in a difficult, awkward situation. While the aforementioned records have been made public, I'm sure not everyone has had an opportunity to request and read the hundreds of pages associated with this incident. So I'd like to offer a brief retelling. I know you can't see the paper in front of me, but these words are quoted directly or paraphrased from interviews with those in attendance at that meeting. The associated responses are what I assume a reasonable individual might say. Before I begin, I'd like to ask that you picture someone you know well and hold in high regard. Your daughter, wife, mother, or a close friend. Imagine that a woman who you know works hard and acts professionally has come home or called you up to tell you about their day. Are you ready? You've got someone pictured? Let's proceed. Hey, you won't believe what happened at work today. Tell me more. I was sitting in a meeting, nothing special about it, not a divisive topic. We needed to make a recommendation about how to use an available fund. Sounds riveting. Exactly. We had already started when my boss or supervisor came in about 15 minutes late. He had been in the hallway on the phone. Here I would remind you that school board members only hire the superintendent, but there is a reason we cannot be even substitute teachers in our schools. We approve hiring, set policy, and make decisions that affect all staff. We are indirect employers, and the power dynamic is not equal. So my boss came in and sat down and hung up the phone. We were having a great discussion when all of a sudden I start hearing background noises, and I thought he took another call. There were voices coming out of his phone. Oh, we've all forgotten to turn off our ringer at some point. That is always embarrassing. I wish it was simply a ringtone. We soon realized with growing horror that it was clearly a porno audio file or movie. That poor guy, definitely worse than forgetting to turn off your ringer. How awkward for everyone, but I'm sure he headed back to the hall to get it under control. No, stayed in the room. It went on for what felt like a very long time, probably 20 to 30 seconds, while he was frantically trying to turn it off. It was graphic. It was not a romance audiobook. There was speaking at first, I think, because that was what I thought was the phone call. Then you could hear a woman moaning loudly. You could hear slapping noises. Oh my, I'm sure he immediately apologized once he managed to turn it off. Nope. What he did say was, well, I guess we all know what that was, but he didn't address it. He didn't leave the room. He didn't give us any reason for that to have occurred. My assumption was that he'd been listening to that on his way to the committee meeting. If he was doing something on his phone that could have caused discomfort before he arrived, he had a responsibility to make sure the porno file was closed before entering my workplace and a public building. Agreed. No judgment what any adult chooses to do in their own time. And he was there for official business. And if he had no idea how it got on his phone, why not make that clear? What happened next? Someone tried to break the ice and asked something like, did your phone get hacked? It was all very awkward and uncomfortable. Then we resumed the meeting. One person left in the middle of the meeting because she was so uncomfortable. Well, I imagine it was like a deer caught in the headlights at that point and just needed time to gather his wits. By the end of the meeting, I'm sure he profusely apologized for the inappropriate nature of the audio, vowed to figure out what happened, and promised it would never happen again. Again, you would think so, but no. That would have been nice. Seriously? I hope you immediately headed to speak to his boss or HR. In fact, I did. I was in another meeting with him a little later. I avoided eye contact with him. I just kind of tried to avoid him. When I got home tonight, he called my cell phone. I did not pick up. I was uncomfortable that he called on my personal cell phone. Wait a minute. You have a work email, right? Yes, of course I do. You have a work phone? Yes. In the past, he's called my personal phone in the evening after late meetings to discuss board matters. While I didn't always pick up, and I thought it was a little inappropriate, I wanted to be helpful and I didn't see any real harm. I can honestly say I don't think my boss even knows my cell phone number. Why would he? If he wants to talk about work or something that happened at work, it should be over business channels or at work. That's not okay. Now I've requested supportive measures because I just felt that I don't want him calling me outside of business hours. About time you set that boundary. I want to be clear that I don't think he played the porno on purpose. I think it was truly a mistake, but it makes me feel very uncomfortable to think about what he was doing just prior to coming into a meeting with us. I will say in the past, I would have been fine meeting with him alone, but not going forward. I absolutely see where you're coming from. What bothers me the most is his dismissive nature that I feel he has continued with post-incident. Now, if your primary thought at this point would still be that poor guy, I would say you were either not being entirely honest with yourself, or you should take a moment of self-reflection about why. We have been asked repeatedly, what's the big deal? Mr. Glover has readily admitted this occurred and the playing of this pornographic audio was accidental. True. Imagine if the same thing happened on a teacher's phone during a parent-teacher conference, at a staff department meeting. How about at a study group led by a teacher with students after school? Would you still be so blasé? I join my fellow board members in saying we remain committed to providing a safe, comfortable work environment for all of our employees. We are required to remain impartial and ensure our district was not deliberately indifferent to our employees' feeling of safety in the workplace. Purely by coincidence, I just finished my annual training at work for harassment prevention. As a manager, I get the extended version, as it's my role to ensure a safe and comfortable work environment for employees and to act if that environment is threatened. The training stressed that any complaint, verbal or written, is to be taken seriously and immediately followed up on by collecting facts. All employees and vendors are obligated to cooperate with that collection of facts. When 3 individual complaints were received, 1 written and 2 verbal, this joint SAU board was morally and legally compelled to take them seriously and facilitate the collection of facts. The unique nature of this matter caused a significant reliance on attorneys to engage and structure a process based on this board's directive of following our ACAC policy. By the way, there was no specific policy that covers board members. However, that was closest we thought. This process involved multiple parties, steps, and individuals that resulted in a cost of at least $64,944.30 to our SAU budget. And I believe that's since been amended some, but that was the number and the most recent I've seen. This includes the attorney that did the initial fact finding, the first decision maker, and the appellate decision maker. At a November 18th, 2021 board meeting, this board voted to hire a contracted Title IX coordinator to act as a fact finder regarding the initial reported complaints. It was estimated that it would take about a month and cost approximately $5,000 to $7,000. Every individual who was contacted by this coordinator promptly and willingly cooperated, except Mr. Glover. He refused repeated requests over several months to discuss the facts around November 9th, 2021. Unlike TV, there was no individual showing up at Mr. Glover's door pretending to deliver pizza and instead saying, "You've been served. See you in court." This was not a criminal or civil investigation. The Title IX coordinator was duly collecting facts to give an initial report and recommended next steps, like whether there was a basis to conduct a full investigation for a potential Title IX violation. Mr. Glover's refusal to cooperate hampered her ability to fully discharge her duties. I still do not understand why Mr. Glover even felt the need to engage his own legal counsel when we've already discussed that the boards had no direct power to remove him from office if that was his fear. While Mr. Glover was within his legal rights to demand the additional steps that extended this process beyond the initial estimate, a review of the records will show that every delay was predicated by a request from Mr. Glover and his legal counsel. I remember once starting to fill out a form and realizing I had grabbed a black pen when it called for blue ink. I asked the clerk in charge if I could start over in blue, if I should start over in blue ink, and she assured me it was not necessary. I am a pretty stereotypical middle child. Like, I find comfort in rules. I think they matter. But we have spent nearly a year and more than $60,000 arguing over the equivalent of whether these complaints were written in black or blue ink. In that time, morale and public trust has been fractured, while the employees who look to us for protection have been made to feel diminished, disrespected, and like they had no right to speak up when they were made to feel uncomfortable interacting closely with this individual in their working environment. While the initial event was not intentional, Mr. Glover's choices since those first 30 seconds have stoked a hostile work environment for both the SAU employees and this joint SAU board. He has been the one to repeatedly take time away from many other topics that should rightly be our focus. The mere fact that at least 2 employees felt strongly enough to immediately complain through the proper chain of command and ask for protective measures did not satisfy Mr. Glover. I would argue that their intent was extremely clear, and they did not immediately drop their complaints when directly asked if they intended for them to be formal. He felt there might possibly be a procedural shortcoming, a technicality that was more important than doing everything in our power to provide a safe, comfortable work environment for all of our employees. In my opinion, he cared more about being technically correct than doing what was right or even fiscally appropriate. Being right instead of doing what was right. As a taxpayer, I agree with the student who spoke during public comment on October 27th and suggested several facilities concerns that could have better used the money spent on the extra $60,000 of legal fees. We're currently in budget season, and I can easily think of 100 needs within our schools more immediate and compelling than the 4 hours alone Mr. Glover spoke with our contracted Title IX coordinator about what constitutes a formal complaint. The joint SAU board did not receive the full details or documents until the very end of this process. Our legal counsel is well known and trusted by many school districts in the state of New Hampshire. When questions were raised by Mr. Glover about the strictest interpretation of a formal complaint, we were assured on at least 5 different occasions that we had met both the spirit and the letter of the law in that regard. I believe that had his primary concern truly been for the fidelity of the process, he would have focused on cooperating and allowing us to finish so we could have all facts in hand months sooner. There was always the possibility of an appeal for any finding. As a still sitting board member, he could have then asked that we do exactly what we are doing now and internally review our SAU policies to ensure they allow for modern interpretations such as electronic signatures and possibly a grievance procedure and consequences for violating policy BCA statute number 5, to work respectfully with other board members by encouraging the free expression of opinions and ideas, and by displaying and demonstrating courtesy and decorum in all public places, in all public meetings, and in all public statements. Sorry about that. All of this could have been accomplished sooner had the original process been allowed to proceed without delay. We're all here because we care about education. I would like to give a very brief tutorial on what it's like to be a woman. While I cannot speak for all women, I have a lived experience no individual assigned male at birth can match, and I can certainly point to some commonalities. First, I can speak to my own experience. I have been stalked, sexually abused, and experienced more than 20 years of microaggressions and more as a woman in a male-dominated professional field. I share these very personal things, not for sensationalism or sympathy, but because I think I am sadly fairly representative. Due to shame and fear of judgment, I have never had the courage to share most of that with anyone other than my husband, and even he doesn't know many details. Therefore, I also represent how wildly underreported most of these acts are against women. It is a big deal to make a complaint. It takes great courage and is not done lightly. The pushback in this circumstance is another example of why women are often so reluctant to initiate complaints of any kind, and I fear will have a chilling effect on future situations. Women must always be on guard lest they become victims. And even if we try our best, we will most likely still be the victim of some unwanted attention or behavior. We are responsible for our own actions and the thoughts, actions, and reactions of men within our sphere. All right, wow, you're really bumming us out, Terry. How do women survive? Well, it is second nature to be in survival mode. We know most threats can start subtle. We look for red flags. We notice if someone has been staring a little too long, if a man gets too close and encroaches on our personal space when he's speaking to us. We learn to diffuse aggressive or uncomfortable behavior for fear of escalation. The SAU employees in this case followed the rules and showed up dressed professionally. They were focused on the business at hand. Why did not a single woman in that original meeting bluntly ask Mr. Glover, a physically imposing man who a review of past board meeting recordings will show has the history of aggressive and intense behavior, to leave so they could finish without feeling supremely uncomfortable? Years of conditioning caused them to de-escalate, deflect, give plausible deniability. I hope you weren't hacked, John. One woman removed herself from the situation. They all avoided eye contact and carried on. Why did he not remove himself? Why did he think his opinions and what he brought to that meeting was more important than taking into consideration the feelings of everyone else in that room? When he finally agreed to speak with the Title IX coordinator several months later, he said he did not apologize or leave because he did not want to further disrupt the meeting. It is hard to imagine how anything could have been more disruptive at that point, and a swift, sincere apology would have gone a long way. But Mr. Glover also chose to not offer an unqualified apology during the many times he was at the microphone at his request, speaking about this incident in the nearly year since it occurred. Instead, he raged against us for daring to question his behavior and accused us of not following the letter of the law while blindly ignoring the spirit of the law. By refusing to even attempt to explain himself or leave that day, he added one more red flag to the list for those women. The seed was planted that they now had to worry about what someone was doing immediately before coming into their workplace, a space that should be safe and free of such worries. By denying to provide any further facts in a timely fashion that may have set their minds at ease, Mr. Glover chose to cultivate that poisonous seed. On November 10th, 2021, former Superintendent Adam Steele emailed Mr. Glover and directed that he not have contact with the SAU employees who were present in the meeting and to direct all communication through Mr. Steele. Mr. Glover was comfortable making a public apology last month with his joint board and others in attendance, but I cannot understand what made it impossible to share that same apology through Mr. Steele or with other people in the room anytime before then. Mr. Steele also told Mr. Glover he would be contacted by SAU Chair Mr. O'Keefe and SOHEGAN Vice Chair Stephanie Grund in the coming days. When they met on November 12th, 2021, Mr. Glover said he left that meeting feeling he was in need of an attorney, even though it had not even been established yet whether there were enough grounds for a full investigation. On or around November 17th, both SAU employees asked for the following protective measures. 1, the presence of someone else at all future meetings with Mr. Glover. 2, Mr. Glover shall be prohibited from calling my personal cell phone. 3, future communications be limited to electronic communication, with the exception of meetings where someone else is present. Mr. Glover says he was never clearly informed of the protective measures asked for by the complainants. However, his own SOHEGAN board passed a motion early in this matter that he was not to be in a meeting, phone or in person, with an SAU employee without another board member present. He fully agreed to this motion, and it was still in effect when he chose to directly text one of the original complainants at 1:35 a.m. on January 9th, 2022. After this text, the employee sent a written complaint. She said the text made her feel disturbed and uncomfortable. She said, most disturbing to me was that Mr. Glover was texting me in the middle of the night. I would not expect anyone in my life to text me at 1:35 a.m. in the morning. I know he works in California time, but that doesn't matter. It is not okay with me and my husband. As a night owl, I have been known to send a 2 a.m. email in my time, as I have global coworkers who would receive it during their workday, or those in the US would respond when they wake up. But I have always treated text the same as phone calls because I know people tend to keep their cell phones next to their beds. At the very least, this was inconsiderate and poor judgment. But it also violated the protective motion he agreed to comply with, and his decision to argue over whether a written complaint regarding the incident met his understanding of a formal complaint was beside the point. In an interview with the Title IX coordinator, the complainant said that John's behavior was a slap in the face. I'm not an alarmist. I have put up with a lot of different behaviors in my life. I'm actually feeling like Mr. Glover was doing this purposefully as a manipulation. He backed me into a corner and went ahead and did this, violated the no contact directive. I cannot speak to his motivations. But if Mr. Glover is to be held up as the standard bearer of strict adherence to policy above all else, then his actions directly violating his board's motion would suggest that his belief in the strictest fidelity and personal accountability only matters when he says so. Mr. Glover is not a victim. Due process has been followed. Mr. Glover's behavior was found not to be sexual harassment, and there was no formal complaint, which is required by policy ACAC before a sexual harassment investigation can proceed. It is my sincere hope that we can now get back to primarily focusing on students and only revisit this topic when the policy committee comes back with their recommendations after a review of policies ACAC and BCA to help apply any lessons learned in the future. And I'd like to close this with a call upon all chairs of the individual and this collective board to remind all members that we have been voted to represent our community with honor, to disagree without being disagreeable. We should hold ourselves to the highest standards. Our students look up to us, and we ought to be examples to our staff of how to interact with each other with civility. We do not condone bullying in SAU 39. And if you can't share your feelings without raising your voice, pointing your finger, and bullying your colleagues, I suggest you put yourself in a timeout until such time as you are able to act in a way befitting the very serious work we have been elected to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. There's a lot there to unpack, and I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts. Any other board member would like to say something? Ms. Goulet-Zimmerman.
So I'm not going to contest or argue that the behavior was appropriate. I don't think that was, in my opinion, I didn't ever consider that to be a disputed issue. I think the issue that I am really, really concerned about is how this became, not just for Mr. Glover, but for the employees involved as well. In fact, largely for the employees involved as well, because I share Terry's comments that a lot of the delays were due to Mr. Glover's decisions not to talk, not to engage, or to just engage for extended periods of time about how he felt the policy wasn't being followed. But we did end up with employees who had this hanging over their head for a year as well. And we ended up with $65,000 that was spent for something that we thought was going to be 5 to 7. And my position all along has been that we should be having an autopsy of this after the fact, that we should be looking at what happened, how was it handled, how could it be handled better? And you're right, the policy committee can look at some of that. But there are things that jump out at me that I think remain unanswered questions. And we have the answer from 2 decision makers on whether or not Mr. Glover violated the policy, regardless of what we might think of behavior. That's not the part I mean, I think that part is final. I don't think we have any authority or any ability, even under the policies, to go back and revisit that. What I'm concerned about is a couple things that I think an autopsy could help with. One, it's a little unclear to me. There was a space and time where we went from 3 people who were in the meeting, contacted our superintendent, said this happened. There was a meeting before anyone on this board, other than maybe Chairman O'Keefe and Chairman of the Sohegan board, Grund, were aware of with Mr. Glover. That was done, and Ms. Boehm referenced that meeting, but that was done without the input of this board, or without a decision that there had been a violation, hadn't been a violation. I wasn't in the meeting, so I can't comment on it, but it might, from what I've heard about the meeting, which is admittedly largely from what Mr. Glover has said, entirely from what Mr. Glover has said, it wasn't a, hey, just so you know, the worst case scenario could be. And I think a reading of the policy and a reading of the statutes that involve removing a board member make it really clear that that worst case scenario was incredibly unlikely, unless there was a huge amount of information that wasn't being held and wasn't being shared. So I'm not sure how we went straight from no one's even aware of this to anyone had authority to sit down with Mr. Glover and have that conversation. And I think that's something we should be looking at. I'm not trying to call anyone out on that. I'm not even trying to assign blame or look for someone to blame, but I think we need to know that, so that in the future we proceed in a different manner, unless that's how we think we should proceed. The other thing that really bothered me when I went through the packet was, and I think I alluded to this at the last meeting, Sarah Helsted, who was hired as our Title IX coordinator, issues what she's calling the formal complaint. And it's not an issue of what color was the ink. I disagree with that entirely. It's an issue of, did she comply with the statute? And what she says in her formal complaint is that I find that the behavior could be a violation of Title IX, Title VII, or board policy BCA. And I don't understand how that information, I mean, we had a meeting in April. Our attorney advised us that there was a formal complaint. That was my first board meeting. I assumed that formal complaint had come from one of the employees. I did not ask. I mean, I think we had asked for copies of the formal complaint, but I understood why we weren't able to get it, because if it came from an employee at that time, there are certain requirements and protections in place. It didn't come from an employee. It came from Sarah Helsted. And there are emails in the packet between John Glover's attorney and our attorney back to him that our chair was copied on. And I'm not saying this is malicious, but we need to talk about what happens. My first question, once I saw that packet, was I called Ms. Grund as the chair of the Sohegan board that I sit on and said, is it normal for you all to get a bunch of information that doesn't get shared with the rest of the board? Because again, I'm new, maybe this happens all the time. And she said, no, what are you talking about? And I said, I'm looking at this thing. And I think, I mean, this is one of those things that from my perspective, along the way, every time there was a communication from council, between council, anything like that, that anyone from this board was copied on, we should have all seen it. And it certainly could have come out with, this is confidential. This is not something you can share with the public, but we as the board are the responsible party. And we as the board were the people that hired Sarah Helsted. And we as the board, I mean, I can tell you a couple things. If I had seen some of that information, if I had known she was the one who filed the complaint, I would have raised a bunch of the same questions I've raised recently in discussions with all of us. You know, how is it that she possibly applying the standard finds that there's a violation? And we need to drill her down and have her explain that, because the 3 tests for sexual harassment are really, really clear, and it's really obvious they're not met. And I think part of the problem is that she said BCA, and she kept tying BCA in, and this board did not ask her to look into BCA. And if we had had that information, and there'd been information along the way, we could have put the brakes on that. We could have said, we need to stop, full stop spending money. Before we hire another decision maker, Attorney Helsted, we didn't ask you about BCA. Are you really taking the position that this conduct rose to the level of, and hold on, I had it pulled up here, sexual harassment, which is either kind of, I'll call it quid pro quo sexual harassment. That's the first one, which obviously didn't apply. No one was saying anyone was asked to participate in sexual conduct in response to something else. A sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, or stalking. I think we all agree that that didn't apply. So it has to be unwelcome, sex-based related conduct determined by a reasonable person to be so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that effectively denied a person equal access to the educational program or activity. This standard requires consideration of all the facts and circumstances, including but not limited to the ages, disability status, harasser, or the victim, number of individuals involved in their authority. And that included, that's a big one. And, you know, denied equal access to an educational program or activity. So I don't know. I mean, if there's anyone here sitting on this board that thinks it clearly fell under one of these 3 definitions in ACAC of sexual harassment, I'm happy. I mean, I think we should have that discussion, but I don't see how it ever got there. And I think, again, the whole problem is that she included BCA and we didn't ask her to include BCA. And the only way we fix this process so it doesn't happen again is by sitting down, having a committee or someone who looks at this, goes through the process and says, what went wrong? Where did it go wrong? Again, I'm not talking about the underlying conduct. I'm not justifying the underlying conduct. I think it is incredibly unfortunate the way it was handled immediately after the fact. I mean, I understand and I hear Mr. Glover's position that it was incredibly awkward for him and he didn't know what to say. And I understand that. I do think it's unfortunate that there wasn't an immediate, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. But again, I'm not debating the merits. I'm debating the process because the process is likely to be repeated. Hopefully not, but it could be. And we don't want to be sitting in this situation X years down the road where we're saying, well, let's just do it exactly like we did last time, because we know that what we did last time wasn't good for our employees, wasn't good for our school district, took a long time and a lot of money and left a lot of people in limbo during that entire time. Again, foremost in my concern in that regard is the employees. So those are my thoughts.
Any other comments? Ms. Clark.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I agree that the process needs to be evaluated and how we can improve this and have a real meaningful process that applies to board members. That's obviously important. I think a lot of the concerns that are brought up here is that the event involving offering Mr. Glover an opportunity to resign, his own description of events has evolved from the beginning of this process up until now, right? We started with, there was a discussion, options were given, to now threats are being given, and this is retribution or whatever, right? So there's been this evolving of the narrative over time. Also, as soon as this issue would have been brought before the board, Mr. Glover's right to any privacy would have been gone. So any kind of opportunity to not engage in this publicly would have been gone the moment that it was brought before a board and determined whether that option should have been given. I agree. I disagree that this cannot be addressed within the context of looking at our ACAC policy and how we will address these concerns moving forward. And I also disagree that we ever had an opportunity to pull the brakes on this. At what point, until Mr. Glover was willing to engage with the individual who was responsible for looking at whether or not this met the criteria of a Title VII, Title IX, could we have met the burden of being responsive to our employees' needs and concerns? No determination of anything could have been made until that participation happened. So I feel that an evaluation of ACAC is the most thorough thing that we can do to prevent this moving forward. Anything else is just going to be rehashing open wounds that there's just no way of undoing anything that has already happened. How we can solidify and make our policies as concrete as possible, which I also have skepticism if that's possible, given the inability of us to do anything other than a public censure. I'm not sure what opportunities we do have, but I think a policy evaluation is the best opportunity we have without also spending unnecessary amounts of money to potentially pay more lawyers to be involved and interviewed and go over this process. Because I mean, what else are we going to do other than maybe interview Sarah Hellstad, which will cost us money? How many more tens of thousands of dollars are we going to apply to essentially come to the same conclusion that our policies need to be evaluated?
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Ms. Gliggs?
Very briefly, just in response to that, when I say I think we should do an autopsy, I am in no way, shape, or form suggesting we hire an attorney to do it. I see no reason why we couldn't do that ourselves. The policy, I mean, if the board's decision is that this is just going to get turned over to the policy committee, as a member of the policy committee, I'm going to ask, does that mean that we have the right to ask questions, bring people in and ask them questions, have them explain things? And I'm seeing shaking heads, and that's exactly what I expected. So that's not an autopsy. That's not a looking back. And looking back and evaluating something does not mean you're met with silence and you start over again and say, all right, how might we change this? There's going to be limited things we can do to change ACAC because it's a Title IX policy required by law. We can't just go in and start changing it up. What we're going to have to do is say, if this was applying to a board member or someone within the community, then this is what we do. And it's going to have to be some like ACAC alt or something. I don't know. But we can't just go in. We're not rewriting Title IX. And, you know, I don't see how the problem gets fixed. I'm going to say again, if we can't figure out all the places it broke down in the first place.
Ms. Lawrence?
I was just going to agree, Anna. I mean, I think part of the issue here is that fundamentally policy ACAC is not the right policy for this incident. And that is an inherent problem, right? I mean, this looks like more like sexual harassment in the workplace rather than in an educational institution. And I think that's part of the issue here and part of what we need to discuss and we need to grapple with is how do you handle that if it comes up with a board member and not a teacher, not a staff member, not a student, because that is the main difference here. And I think that's also where some of the confusion came in the process with our Title IX coordinator and investigator. I think that was probably part of her confusion. I can't say for sure, but I have an inkling that that's where some of it came in and why she probably pulled in BCE, because it is board member related rather than ACAC not being board member related. So that's my take on it. Do I think we need a postmortem here? Yes. Do I know where the right place to do that is? No. Do I think that we need to have another huge committee to investigate all of the things that are already clear in the hundreds of pages? No. Do I think that the policy committee is necessarily the right place to tackle it? No. So what can I tell you there? I don't know, but I mean, I do think we need to take some action. I don't know what that right action is. I think we can all see where some of the failings have happened. And I think we just need to determine what that next step is. I agree with Ms. Clark that spending more money trying to like dig into this is just not an option.
Thank you. Let's turn over to Ms. Grund. She's got a proposal.
Sure, thank you. So after reflecting on our October SAU meeting, I think it's important that we review the process that occurred during the John Glover Title IX investigation. The board initially authorized $5,000, and we know now the costs are approximately $65,000. This is a very large difference, and we should examine it. I mean, if you take $325 an hour at $65,000, it's 200 hours that was spent on this. We should review the process We should review the process followed to understand if our policy was properly followed to ensure we do not have this happen again. My recommendation is that we make sure we are focused on the process to ensure our policy is strong and make any recommendations for improvement. Therefore, I make a motion to form a committee to review the investigation process and report any policy recommendations or procedural issues to the SAU board. We can put into discussion what this committee might look like.
First.
I'll second.
By Ms. Zimmerman, open for discussion.
So can I start?
Sure.
Sure. So my thoughts is on just a committee. I'm just thinking like one person from each board. It needs to be a small member. And they really just need to go through and say, here's what our policy, was it followed? And then even the questions of, you know, if there were deadlines, like they were supposed to have reply within 10 days or have it 10 days, was that followed? And if it wasn't, then we need to say, okay, our policy wasn't followed. There's an issue. And we need to make sure that we put into process that if anything like this happens next time, we make sure it's followed and whatever that might look like. Or we look at BCA and we kind of give some suggestions of what is it that's different in this situation versus ACAC. And we should report back within 30, 60 days at most. My thoughts.
Ms. Lawrence.
Sorry. The policy committee right now has 2 representatives from each board on it. I think it would be feasible to take a subset of the current policy committee. And the reason that I would suggest that, not that I want to give the policy committee more work, I'm seeing their eyes on me right now. But my thinking in that is because most of the policy committee members have been longstanding policy committee members, and those who haven't are well-versed in policy and the way that the policy committee functions and how we do policy in this SAU and in the districts. So I think that would make sense. I also think it would make sense to pull in human resources as part of the discussion here, since there is the employee component. I think that that's an important factor that we're missing in this piece. And I think if we're going to look at developing policy or revising policy to cover this situation, I think that's something that absolutely has to happen. So that's all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Hacker.
My understanding that a lot of the policies come directly from the state or framed up by the state or a board at the state. Is that accurate?
Can I answer? Yeah, our
So-
policy templates are from the NHSBA.
So my suggestion is that we reach out to the state and the resources they have in policy development.
They refuse to help us.
Yeah, I think because this is so specific
But yes.
that happened, they don't want to get into the personal issues of our town. Would be my gut that they would help, but they didn't.
Ms. Gulazer.
Just very briefly, I do think the Sauhegan, I like Ms. Lawrence's suggestion. I think the Sauhegan board's gonna have to look at that and decide who our representative is gonna be, because the only, our 2 representatives are Mr. Glover and myself. I personally don't think it should be Mr. Glover who's doing the autopsy. And I'm also not comfortable just on my own saying I'm not comfortable with Mr. Glover, so it's going to be me. I think our board should decide who that person's going to be. But other than that, I like the suggestion.
Mhm.
It's just kind of a unique situation for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have some questions about what not personnel wise, but like what the subcommittee might look like. Like, are we going to give them certain rules and guidelines? Or is it gonna be, they're gonna delve into whatever they see fit? I guess what I'm trying to get at, I'll just be more direct, I guess. Is the information in the hundreds of pages, is that enough? I know Ms. Zimmerman has indicated maybe interviewing people, and I just don't know that it's helpful to re-interview the complainants, or I guess I just want to know exactly what would be agreeing to in terms of guidelines, and if that makes any sense.
No, I think it does make sense, and it needs to be clear. Yes, there's documentation upon documentation in here, and we just need to make sure we understand the timelines and to make sure that the things that we can answer the questions. If our policy says this, was this followed? And if it's in the documentation, that's in the documentation. If it's unclear, then maybe sending out a few quick questions, but to go back and re-interview people from the get-go, we are not re-interviewing and reinvestigating this case. Absolutely not. I think we just need to look at our policies, and we need to make sure that things were followed.
Did you have a follow-up? No, Ms. Lawrence.
I would be really interested in our interim superintendent's take on policy and how policy is implemented and what happens when you are implementing policy and something goes awry, what steps you take. I mean, I think that would be important for any subcommittee to be considering is how, from someone who does it on a daily, like, how do you do that? How do you evaluate when something goes wrong? I think that's part of Mr. White's question is, what is the scope? How can you define that to help the subcommittee have some bumpers in the process? Whoever that.
Sure, and happy to work with the subcommittee and talk about how we implement policy and what happens when we don't, and how we rectify it and how we fix it. Absolutely. Happy to do that.
Any other discussion on the motion?
I have a question.
Yeah, Mr. Conklin.
Yeah, so I am very hesitant to grant any subcommittee power of interview or anything like that. Dissection, evaluation, I think we have all the information we need to do that, and I would just really hesitate to put anybody in the crosshairs of some subcommittee that is not fully defined in its role.
Thank you. Ms. Clark?
I think I have a related concern. I mean, a lot of the questions that were raised about what the Title IX coordinators' thoughts were or intent was, I don't see how those questions and process decisions can be evaluated without actually interviewing them. So I'm concerned about the committee being forced to assign intent or interpret people's internal thought processes, or trying to parse out, one party says this occurred and another party says that occurred, but there's no objective information to say either way. Like, how do we navigate those components of this process without incurring extra cost, without overextending the findings of the committee? I think that's where my concern lies.
Yeah, I feel comfortable answering this if you want to. I mean, I think the whole process, Kristen, is to review how our policy was actually implemented, and to use Mr. Glover's comments at the beginning with fidelity, and seeing where things, quote unquote, went off the rail from some people's perspective. And once we have an opportunity to review all the data that's already been presented to us, I think we can come up with a couple of recommendations to our policy committee to then implement some subtle changes. We're not going to go ahead and rewrite the entire ACAC policy, but BCA or see where those recommendations can come from, so the policy committee can then debate, suggest recommendations for changes, and then bring them to this board for adoption. Is that correct? Thank you. Ms. Coolidge, member.
So, I am okay with it starting that way. I think at the very least, though, the policy committee ought to be doing something a little like the finance committee does, and saying, look, going forward, these are the things that we think should have happened. Unanswered questions remain about why did X happen or why did Y happen? And maybe this board decides to take no further action on that. But I think it's a reasonable thing to say, these are the questions that remain unanswered. These are the questions that didn't get addressed. These are the things that we really need to be thinking about and considering next time. And then this board can decide if it goes any further, depending on what those comments, recommendations, or thoughts are. And they may be nothing, or they may be just a couple of little things, but I think that there are things that aren't in the documents. Like, the documents start with 3 complaints and then a board meeting. And we know there was stuff that happened in between there. Because there was a meeting, whatever what was said, there was a meeting. So everything we need is not necessarily in the documents. And maybe the board decides not, as I said, I'm fine with the way we've discussed it as far as the policy, the committee at least starting. But I seriously hope whoever the committee is looks closely at what are unanswered and how should we be handling those things in the future. I mean, I've talked a lot at Sohegan. I'll talk about here. I think we should be erring on the side of oversharing information with each other, for example. We should, when we get an open records request in, if there's any reason we're allowed to release it without it, harming an employee or being something that has to be withheld, we should be, even if we don't have to, and there's a shield we can't hide behind. But that's my view, and I understand that everybody might not agree with me on that, but there are certainly things I think that should be raised, because I would be incredibly uncomfortable in the future sitting on another investigation like this and knowing that there were people who had information about it around this table who weren't sharing it with me. And I'm really pissed off that it happened.
Any other comments? Ms. Beam?
Yeah, I promise it's brief. I would just like to point out that we didn't have a lot of precedent to go on. There was very little guidance beyond our again, respected and well-known legal counsel to really help us through, because there was nothing that was specific to, and our current BCA is not broad enough to have covered this, because we are in a kind of special category. So the thought that we are going to have, hopefully not continual board members needing such process, that I would rather really look at this as a lesson learned, that we had very little precedent to go on. We did the best we could with legal counsel. We thought at some point we might be called upon to be decision makers, and that's why we were waiting for, and you notice I was very careful in my language. It was for fact gathering, and the fact gathering could not occur without everyone cooperating. It inhibited this from being what all of us agreed needed to happen. And I feel like that is a far bigger problem here, that we had all agreed to the best process we could under the circumstances. And there was a very obvious roadblock to that, to where we could have even decided whether or not to go any farther. And we were all duly waiting for that to come back. And so I would really like to say, instead of trying to look for blame or look for guilt or what the hell happened there, that's certainly not what I'm asking for in my intent. And then we keep saying AC, but I think that it's even more important that we look at BCA in conjunction, because BCA is the one that governs board members. And that's where we did not have enough to go with, and we kind of cobbled the two together somehow to try to come up with something that could work, right? And so I really want to make sure that our intent is we did the best we could with the information we had at the time, without precedent to really turn to, without without a lot of people wanting to support us on this. And so really, let's look for lessons learned for next time. I really want to make sure that that is the intent here. It's not a witch hunt. It's not a, there was certainly, I don't think, bad faith on any along the way. So that's my only caution I would like to raise.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, let's call the vote. All in favor, we're going to do a roll call vote. Mr. Glover.
Glover abstain.
Repeat the motion.
Yep. Ms. Grun, can you go ahead and repeat your motion,
Sure.
please?
The motion is to form a committee to review the investigation process and report any policy recommendations or procedural issues to the SAU board.
Thank you. Mr. Glover abstains. Mr. Torres.
Torres, yes.
yes.
Peters, yes.
Grund, yes.
Delay Zimmerman, yes.
Eckhoff, yes.
Lawrence, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Gothier, yes.
Conklin, yes.
White, yes.
Parisi, yes.
Beam, yes.
Ms. Clark.
Clark, yes.
Thank you. That motion passes. Any other comments before we move on?
Yes. Are we going to discuss what who that committee is? Are we going to
Are we-
take Ms. Lawrence's recommendation?
That we just did.
I just
by
want to make sure
Taking
that.
Ms. Lawrence's recommendation,
wanted to
one
make sure.
person from each board, and that was the whole purpose of doing it during the discussion piece. Did I not understand that correctly? Okay. Yep.
So for clarity.
Yep.
Or are you just gonna let the policy committee do it in full?
For clarity, the policy committee is meeting in December. At that meeting, is this board okay if that policy committee forms a subset of 3 members to review, just as we stated, and to report back within 30 days to this board?
Perfect. Just wanted.
30 days.
I don't know if we can do it with 30 to 60.
So can we put a deadline of our February meeting?
Sure.
There's holidays in there.
Yep.
And I think bringing this up at the end of February would be appropriate. Yep. Is that okay with you?
Yep. 100%.
I don't want to be taxing on the district.
Yeah, February's better.
Thank you, sir. Just point of clarification, or just to make it easier, since the Sauhegan board is sitting here, that I have no trouble with Ms. Clay Zimmerman being our representative.
Yeah.
If we have a meeting before, so if there is an issue, maybe we can just put that on the agenda and make sure that's being discussed in our meeting. I think.
I'm looking now. Negative 2.
Yeah. Did I hear you correctly that you were thinking that maybe you would want someone else to join you on that? Even? That's what I heard you say.
No, if it's gonna be 3, I have no problem. If it's gonna be 3 and the Sauhegan board is comfortable with me being that person, that's fine. It's not really a choice if I'm the only one in the policy committee. So I wanted just to make sure the board was aware of that and the board was comfortable with that, if that was the decision we went ahead with.
No objection.
Okay, so moving on, let's do our public comment 2 of 2. Any members of the public like to address the board? Come up to the mic, state your name, town in which you reside, and you'll have the floor for 3 minutes.
My name is Martin Goulet for the 3rd time this evening. I have read the hundreds of pages released to the public. First, let's not forget that it was found that this board was responsible for violating its own policies. Very uncomfortable with the seeming desire to sweep that part under the rug. The process has undoubtedly been uncomfortable for the affected SAU employees. I really do feel for them. It was the failures of this board in not following its own policies that extended this uncomfortable situation for too long, including for these employees. Mr. Glover was clearly in the wrong, not only in the meeting, but also in several actions after the meeting, including the late night text. It's true that some of his assertions don't pass the sniff test. For example, that he was unaware of certain supportive measures. But we should be clear. This process did not stall because Mr. Glover asserted his right not to participate, his right not to participate. It stalled because the process assumed that his participation was required. It was first assumed by Attorney Helsted, and by the way, who probably had a monetary conflict of interest in performing that diligence function, because only in finding that an investigation was warranted would her firm really get into the money, the 60-some thousand. Blaming Mr. Glover for the process failures of this board is egregious and seems like an attempt to deflect blame for the mistakes that this board in fact made. In fact, I don't know that the language could be any plainer than in the document that was communicated to you all, that you were responsible for the failure of your policies. It suggests to me that the questions raised about this process by several of the professionals that have written reports and by countless citizens that have come before this board in the course of the last year have fallen on deaf ears. Mr. Glover does not need to be a saint or even a sympathetic figure for this board to recognize that it made serious process errors, and it needs to understand those errors in order to fix them. Thank you.
Any other comments from members of the public? Great, if you just come up to the mic, state your name, town in which you reside, and you'll have the floor for 3 minutes.
Elizabeth Kuzma, Amherst. Listening to the discussions that have been had over the last, since October and even tonight, it is so clear that policy ACAC is lacking in so many ways. Or we are missing very key policies. Mrs. Goulet-Zimmerman pointed out tonight that our employees have absolutely zero right to assume that they can walk into a place of into their place of employment and not be free from sexual harassment, because we have no policies that cover them. Section 2 only prohibits or includes sexual harassment in this case if it precludes somebody from learning, right? From education. Our employees don't learn here in this context. So looking through, I quickly did a scan of several of the district policies, and I can't see any that allow for our employees to feel safe from sexual harassment in their workplace. And that's not okay. Beyond that, there's a whole bunch of other issues that I really hope the policy committee takes a look at in future policies, whether it's adjusting this one or creating future policies. Thank you.
Thank you. And there are comments from the public? Seeing none, we will close public comment, and a new item on our agenda is response to public comment. And as was communicated to board members prior to this evening, this is a new item on our agenda that came from the New Hampshire School Board Association, that school boards across the state are opening up a time for school board members to respond to members of the public that may have asked a question, may have asked a follow-up, may have asked for a particular piece of data or process that they wanted to have added to a future agenda item. So tonight we had limited public comments, but there were 3 very important individuals that came forward and shared their time with us. And so now is an opportunity for members of this board to respond to those comments. Remember, this is not a back and forth opportunity. This isn't a debate. This isn't an hour-long discussion, but an opportunity for anybody if they did want to say something. Ms. Peters.
I'm not on the policy committee. I don't plan to come. No, I'm good. But I would love to see Ms. Kuzma's thoughts, since she did serve on the policy committee and sat through the beginning of this. So if you have things you want to share with us, I would love to see that.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments. All right, let's end that up. And then we are going to go into non-public under RSA 91-A3, number 2, semicolon 1. If we could go ahead and entertain a motion to move into non-public with a roll call vote. Ms. Peters, second.
I'll second.
Ms. Grund, we're going to do a roll call vote. Starting with Glover.
Glover, yes.
Torres, yes.
Mayor, yes.
Peters, yes.
Grund, yes. Zimmerman, yes.
Eckhoff, yes.
Lawrence, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Here, yes.
Conklin, yes.
White, yes.
Parisi, yes.
Beam, yes.
Clark.
Ms. Clark.
Clark,
Great,
yes.
Ms. Clark is yes. Thank you everyone for attending this evening.